My husband thinks I'm selfish for going on vacation without my stepdaughter. I F-35 just got back from what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation, but instead, it's turned into one giant argument between me and my husband. To give some context, I've been married to Ben M38 for 4 years. He has a 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, from his previous marriage to his ex, Melissa. When Ben and I first got together, Sophie was only 6. She was shy and quiet, but sweet. I don't have any children of my own, so I tried my best to build a bond with her without ever forcing anything. I wanted to respect her space and her mom's role. Over the years, we've grown closer. She calls me by my name, not Mom, which I completely understand, and we have our little traditions, like baking cookies every Christmas and going to the farmer's market on weekends when she's with us. But to be totally honest, co-parenting with Melissa has been exhausting. She's one of those people who constantly finds reasons to criticize what we do. If Sophie comes home with new clothes that I picked out, Melissa complains they're too mature. If we take her out somewhere fun, Melissa says we're trying to buy her love. It's been years of walking on eggshells. This past spring, Ben and I started planning a short trip to Florida. We both work full-time and haven't had any real alone time in ages. The idea was to go for a week in July, relax on the beach, eat good food, and just breathe for once. Sophie would be at her mom's that week anyway, so we thought it was perfect timing. I even checked with Ben before booking anything, asking him if he was absolutely sure the timing wouldn't conflict with anything. He said, "Yeah, she'll be at Melissa's. It's fine." So we booked the flights, hotel and everything months in advance. I was honestly counting down the days. I even got new swimwear and a book I'd been meaning to read for months. Fast forward to a week before the trip. Melissa suddenly texted Ben saying she needed to switch weekends because of some family wedding on her side, meaning Sophie would be with us the week of our vacation. At first I thought, okay, no big deal. Maybe we can figure something out. But then Melissa said she wasn't asking. She was telling. She'd already made plans and we needed to step up. I was annoyed. I tried to be understanding, but it felt unfair. We'd had this trip planned for months. Ben told her we couldn't switch because of our reservations. But she guilt-tripped him hard. She said things like, "You're choosing a beach over your daughter?" And, "Wow, great example you're setting." And that's when things between me and Ben started getting tense. He began acting weird, distant even. Finally, the night before the trip, he said, "Maybe we should just cancel." I was stunned. We'd both put time off work, prepaid for everything. And this wasn't even our fault, I said. "Ben, we can't keep rearranging our lives every time Melissa decides to change her plans. You said she'd be with her mom." He didn't say much after that, just sighed and went to bed early. The next morning I woke up, packed my bag, and told him I was still going. I said, "You're welcome to come, but I'm not canceling over something that isn't my responsibility." He just sat there, looking conflicted. Eventually he said, "I can't go. Sophie's my kid." So I went alone. I thought maybe a few days of space would help. But when I landed in Florida, my phone started blowing up. Ben sent me a long message saying he couldn't believe I abandoned the family vacation and left him to explain to Sophie why she wasn't invited. I never once said she wasn't invited. I just didn't think it was fair to cancel the whole trip because Melissa couldn't keep her schedule straight. For the first couple days, I tried to enjoy myself. Went on walks, read by the pool, even got a massage. But the guilt started creeping in. Every time I checked my phone, there was another passive-aggressive text from Ben, or worse, a message from Melissa saying, "I always knew you didn't really care about Sophie." When I got home, Ben was cold. We barely talked for 2 days. Then last night, it all came out. He said I was selfish for taking a solo vacation when his daughter was crying. Thinking I didn't want her there, I told him that wasn't fair. That I'd only gone because he agreed to the original dates, and that I didn't do anything wrong, but he shot back with, "You could have changed the dates if you really cared." Now I'm sitting here wondering if I was too stubborn. Maybe I should have canceled, or rescheduled, or offered to take Sophie with me, even if it meant changing the vibe of the trip. But deep down, part of me feels like I'm not crazy for wanting 1 week of peace after years of being flexible. It feels like I'm constantly expected to bend to everyone else. To Melissa's last-minute changes, to Sophie's feelings, which I do care about deeply, and to Ben's guilt as a dad trying to please everyone. I love Sophie, but I also love my husband. And lately, it feels like there's no space for me in this family equation. Maybe I handled it wrong, but I'm tired of being the one who has to sacrifice every time someone else messes up their schedule. When I wrote the original post, I didn't expect so many people to have such strong opinions. Some people sided with me, saying I deserved time off and that Melissa had been manipulating Ben for years. Others said I should have just taken Sophie with me or canceled the trip altogether because that's what you do when you marry a parent. I spent the next few days trying to process everything, both from the comments and from what was happening in my house. When I got home from Florida, the tension between Ben and me was almost unbearable. We'd barely spoken beyond the basics. Who's picking up Sophie? What's for dinner? Did you pay the electric bill? The silence was so thick it felt like living with a stranger. Then, the following Saturday, Sophie came over. I was nervous to see her because I didn't know what Ben had told her about my trip. When she walked in, she gave me a shy wave and said, "Hi." Her tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. Ben looked at me, then said, "Sophie, why don't you go unpack your stuff?" The moment she disappeared upstairs, he turned to me. "You should probably talk to her," he said. "About what?" I asked, genuinely confused. He sighed. "She thinks you didn't want her to come with us." My heart dropped. "What? I never said that." "I know," he said, "but she doesn't understand adult scheduling problems. She just knows you went to Florida and she wasn't invited." That stung. Not because Sophie thought it, but because I knew exactly who had planted that seed. "Melissa told her that, didn't she?" I asked quietly. Ben didn't answer, but his silence was enough. I went upstairs to Sophie's room and knocked. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling on her tablet. When she saw me, she gave me this tiny, awkward smile. "Hey," I said, sitting down beside her. "Can we talk for a sec?" She nodded but didn't look up. "I heard you were upset about the trip." I started gently. "I want you to know I didn't go because I didn't want you there. You were supposed to be with your mom that week, and when things changed, we didn't have time to plan something new." Sophie finally looked at me, her big blue eyes brimming a little. "Mom said you didn't want me there because I make things not fun." That broke me. I pulled her into a hug immediately. "Hey, that's not true. You never make things not fun. You make everything better." She sniffled a bit, then whispered, "Then why didn't you wait so we could go together?" I had no real answer that wouldn't make things worse. So I said the only thing that felt right, because I messed up. I thought it was okay to take a break for a little while, but I missed you the whole time I was there. She leaned against me and said quietly, "I missed you too." Later that night, after she went to bed, Ben and I finally had the real conversation we'd been avoiding. He admitted he didn't tell me how bad Melissa's messages had gotten that week. Apparently, she'd told him that he was a deadbeat dad if he didn't take Sophie instead of going on some vacation with his new wife. She even threatened to go to court to revisit custody if he didn't agree to the switch. I was furious. "And you didn't tell me any of this?" I asked. He shook his head. "I didn't want to ruin the trip for you, but I also didn't want to be the guy who put his wife above his kid. That's not fair." "Ben," I said, "it's not about choosing one over the other. It's about not letting your ex control every decision we make. I'm tired of living like she's in this house with us." He rubbed his temples. "I know. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't want to fight with her again." That's when I realized the core issue wasn't just the vacation. It was that Ben never really set boundaries with Melissa. Every time she demanded something, he gave in, just to avoid the chaos. And every time it chipped away at us, over the next few days, I tried to focus on repairing things with Sophie. We spent an afternoon baking cookies, watched her favorite movie, and even painted our nails together. Things slowly started feeling normal again. But my relationship with Ben still felt fragile. We were polite, but distant. Then one night, he came home from work with a small envelope in his hand. "I did something today," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a printed email, confirmation for a weekend cabin rental at a lake nearby. 2 nights, just the 3 of us. "I thought maybe we could do a little family trip," he said. "Something small, something we all plan together." I teared up. "You didn't have to—" "I did," he interrupted softly. "Because I realized you've been bending over backwards to fit into a situation that isn't always fair to you. And I haven't made it easier." That was the first time in months that I felt seen. The trip wasn't fancy. We roasted marshmallows, played card games, and Sophie made me a friendship bracelet with the word family on it. When we came back home, things felt different. Melissa still texted occasionally with her usual passive-aggressive comments, but Ben finally stopped reacting. He told her once, clearly, "We're doing what works best for us. You don't get to dictate our schedule anymore." I think that was the moment I realized we might actually be okay. It's been a couple of months since then, and while things aren't perfect, we're in a better place. Sophie's happier, Ben's more relaxed, and I finally feel like I'm part of a family that's growing in the right direction. Not one that's constantly pulled apart by someone else's bitterness. I still think about that Florida trip sometimes, and I still believe I wasn't wrong for going, but I also learned that communication matters more than principle when it comes to family. Because sometimes, the person you need to stand up for the most isn't your spouse or your stepchild. It's the version of yourself who's been silently trying to keep it all together. It's been 6 months since that cabin trip, and I wish I could say everything stayed peaceful. But families, especially blended ones, rarely stay that simple. Things had actually been really good for a while. Sophie started middle school and seemed to be thriving. She'd call me bonus mom sometimes, which melted my heart every time. Ben and I were finally back in sync, communicating better, going on date nights, even planning another little trip as a family for the spring. But then Melissa found out. It started small, a few snide comments in her texts about how it must be nice that we could afford trips while she was barely scraping by. Ben ignored it at first, like he always did, but the messages got worse. She began telling Sophie things like, "Don't get too used to your dad's wife. She's not your real family." Or, "Your dad's money should be going toward your future, not vacations." I didn't want to overreact, but I saw how it started to affect Sophie. She became quieter, moodier. She'd go from hugging me one day to avoiding eye contact the next. One night, while I was tucking her in, she blurted, "Mom says you're trying to replace her." It was like a punch to the chest. I sat beside her and said softly, "Sophie, I will never replace your mom. She's always going to be your mom. But I love you too, in my own way. There's enough room in your heart for both of us." She didn't say anything at first, but she nodded, and I could tell she wanted to believe me. Later that night, Ben finally snapped. He called Melissa, and for the first time in years, he didn't let her talk over him. I was in the other room, but I could hear the whole thing. "Melissa," he said, calm but firm, "you need to stop putting Sophie in the middle. This isn't healthy for her. You don't have to like my wife, but you will respect the fact that she's part of Sophie's life." I couldn't hear her response, but whatever it was, Ben's tone hardened. "If this keeps happening, I'll talk to my lawyer about revisiting custody." I'm serious. I'd never seen him so assertive before. It was both shocking and relieving. After that night, things cooled off. For a bit, Melissa stopped the comments and Sophie seemed lighter again. She started leaving little drawings on the fridge, one of which was all three of us holding hands under the words, "My family." But about a month ago, something happened that made me realize how fragile everything still was. It was Sophie's birthday. We had planned a small get-together at our house. Just close family and a couple of her friends. Melissa had her own celebration planned for the following weekend, so we thought it would all be fine. Halfway through the party, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was, Melissa, standing there with a forced smile and a gift bag in her hand. "Thought I'd stop by to drop off her present," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Ben looked like he'd seen a ghost. Sophie, of course, was thrilled at first. Running over to hug her mom, I tried to stay polite, smiling awkwardly as Melissa made small talk with some of the guests. But it didn't take long before the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. At one point, she pulled Sophie aside and whispered something to her. Sophie's face fell. When she came back, she was quiet, pushing cake around her plate. After the party, I gently asked what her mom had said. She looked down and mumbled, "She said it's weird I had 2 birthdays because that's something only spoiled kids do." That night, I broke down crying after Sophie went to bed. I just couldn't understand why someone would use a child as a pawn for their resentment. Ben comforted me, but I could see how tired he was too. "I don't know what else to do," he said quietly. "Every time I think we're past this, she finds a new way to dig in." So we made a decision, a hard one. We scheduled family therapy, not just for Ben and me, but for Sophie too. At first, she was hesitant, but after a few sessions, she started opening up. She talked about how she hated feeling like she had to choose between her mom and me. How she felt guilty for loving both of us. How she sometimes wished everyone could just get along. It broke my heart, but also gave me hope. Our therapist, Dr. Parker, told us something that stuck with me. Blended families don't just happen, they're built brick by brick, with patience, boundaries, and understanding. But you can't build one if someone keeps trying to tear it down. Ben and I have been slowly building again. We've set boundaries, documented Melissa's outbursts, and kept all communication about Sophie through a parenting app now. No more late-night texts or emotional manipulation. And Sophie? She's doing better, she still sees her mom, but she seems more at peace knowing that our home is steady. That it's her safe space. No matter what, the other day, while helping me bake cookies, she looked up and said, "You know, I think it's cool having two families. I get double the love." I had to turn away for a second because I could feel my eyes welling up. It's been a long road, painful, complicated, sometimes unfair. But I finally feel like we're moving forward. Not perfectly, not without scars, but with a real sense of love that's stronger than the noise around it. Melissa may always be a presence, but she no longer holds power over how I feel in my own home. And that's something I didn't think I'd ever be able to say. Stories number 2, my mother refuses to apologize to my wife, and now I've cut her off completely. Even from the kids. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who cuts off a parent growing up. I was always the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over tension, made excuses for people's bad moods, filled in the cracks when things got awkward. But this time, something snapped in me. My wife Laura and I have been married for 8 years. We have 2 kids, a 6-year-old daughter named Sophie and a 4-year-old son named Caleb. We live in a small town outside Nashville, in a neighborhood that's mostly families. The kind of place where kids ride bikes until dinner and everyone waves when you drive by. My mom, Denise, has always been complicated. She's one of those people who believes that being honest means saying whatever she wants without caring how it lands. Growing up, she'd make little comments about people's appearances or choices, and then act shocked when anyone got upset. "What? I'm just being real," she'd say, as if that excused everything. When I met Laura, I thought my mom would love her. Laura's warm, funny, and kind. She's the type who remembers everyone's birthdays, brings food when someone's sick, and volunteers at school events. But from the very beginning, my mom made her feel unwelcome. At first it was subtle. When Laura came to her house for dinner the first time, my mom said, "You don't eat much, do you? I guess that's how you stay so small." Laura laughed it off, but I could tell it bothered her. Then came the comparisons. "You're not really into cooking, huh? Daniel's always liked home-cooked meals," or "You should wear your hair down. It's more feminine that way." After we got married, the tension only grew. My mom didn't like how independent Laura was. She didn't like that we split household duties, or that Laura worked full-time after the kids were born. She called her cold and too modern. Things hit a breaking point 2 years ago. We were at my parents' house for Christmas Eve, and my mom made some snide comment about Laura's family not sending gifts that year. Laura tried to explain. Her dad had just had surgery. Money was tight. But my mom rolled her eyes and said, "There's always an excuse, isn't there?" Laura just got up, took the kids, and went to the car. I followed her out. But by the time I got there, she was crying. She said, "I can't keep doing this. She's mean to me every time we see her, and you just sit there." That stung because she was right. I went back inside and told my mom she needed to apologize, not just for that night, but for all the little things she'd said over the years. I said, "You've been disrespectful to my wife since the day you met her. If you can't fix that, we're not coming around anymore." My mom looked at me like I'd just insulted her. "I'm your mother," she said. "You don't talk to me that way, and I'm not apologizing for telling the truth." My dad tried to calm her down, but she doubled down. Said Laura was too sensitive, and that I was choosing sides. That was the night everything changed. After that, I told my mom I needed space. For months she didn't reach out, no calls, no texts. Then, when Caleb's birthday rolled around, she sent a card that said, "Love, Grandma. I hope Daddy lets us see each other again soon." That hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't an apology. It was manipulation. I called her and said, "You don't get to make me the villain in front of my kids. If you want to be part of their lives, you need to own up to what you've done to Laura." She refused. She said, "I won't be told how to behave by some woman who's turned my son against me." So I cut contact completely, blocked her number, told my dad he's welcome to visit whenever he wants. But if she's coming, they'll both have to stay at a hotel. Laura supported me, but I could tell it broke her heart. She never wanted this. She's tried to make peace so many times. She's even written letters, real, handwritten letters, telling my mom she wants to move forward, that she's not holding grudges. My mom never responded. The kids started asking questions after a few months. "Why doesn't Grandma come over anymore?" Sophie asked one night. I told her, "Grandma and Daddy aren't getting along right now, but that's not your fault." I could see the confusion in her little face, and it killed me. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I did the right thing. Cutting off your own mother isn't something you do lightly. I've read all the articles about setting boundaries and protecting your family, but no one talks about how heavy it feels afterward, how empty holidays become, how weird it is to not hear from your mom on your birthday. My dad still calls sometimes, he never takes sides, but I can tell he wishes I'd just let it go. Last time we talked, he said, "She's not getting any younger, son. Do you really want things to end like this?" And I said, "I don't want it to end at all. I just want her to care enough to say she's sorry." But I know she won't, because to my mom, apologies mean admitting weakness, and she's never been able to do that. Not once in my entire life. So now here we are. The kids don't really remember her anymore. Laura's lighter, freer, happier, and me, I feel caught between relief and grief. Relief that my wife isn't being hurt anymore, and grief that I've lost my mother. Even if she's still alive, sometimes I think about reaching out. I even draft texts and delete them before hitting send. But then I remember all the times I asked her to show empathy, to just be kind, and how she never could. I used to think love meant forgiving everything. Now I think love sometimes means protecting the people who deserve your kindness, even if that means walking away from the ones who don't. And that's what I've done, even if it hurts every single day. About 9 months after I cut my mom off, my dad showed up at our door unannounced. It was a Saturday morning, one of those crisp Tennessee spring days where the air smells like grass and rain. I was outside washing the car. The kids were drawing on the driveway with chalk, and Laura was making pancakes inside. When I saw my dad's silver truck pull into the driveway, my stomach dropped. I knew instantly my mom was with him. I couldn't see her at first. He got out alone, waved, and gave me that cautious, testing look that parents get when they're walking into emotional landmines. "Hey, Danny," he said. "Hey, Dad." He hugged me, and I didn't hug back right away. I was waiting. Sure enough, a few seconds later, the passenger door opened, and there she was, my mom, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy. Clutching her purse like it was armor, Laura stepped out onto the porch with Sophie on her hip. I could feel her whole body tense from across the yard. "Can we talk?" my dad asked. I nodded, but only to him. "Yeah. You can come in for coffee. Just you," he sighed. "Son, just you, Dad," I said louder this time. My mom froze. Halfway between the truck and the walkway, she wasn't used to being told no, especially not by me. Laura caught my eye from the porch. I think she expected me to cave. I almost did. But then Sophie looked up at me and said, "Is that Grandma?" in that small, hopeful voice. And I remembered why I couldn't. My dad came inside alone. Laura stayed polite, offered him coffee, asked about his back, talked about the weather. She's better than me at being civil when things are awkward. I could see her forcing herself to breathe evenly. Dad didn't dance around it. "Your mom misses you," he said quietly. "She misses the kids. She wanted to come today to apologize." I raised an eyebrow. "To apologize? Or to say she misses being in control?" He sighed. "It's not like that, but it was. It always was." He pulled out a folded letter from his jacket pocket. "She wrote this for Laura." Laura looked at me, then took it carefully, like it might explode. She didn't open it right away. She just placed it on the table and said, "Tell her I'll read it when I'm ready." That night, after the kids went to bed, Laura finally opened it. I sat next to her on the couch while she read. It wasn't much of an apology. It started with, "I'm sorry if my words ever made you feel uncomfortable." Right there. If, the word that cancels out every ounce of sincerity. Then it went on about how she just wants her family back and never meant to offend. Laura folded it and set it down. "She still doesn't get it," she whispered. I wanted to fix it, to say something that would make this whole mess less heavy, but there was nothing to say. The truth hung there between us like fog. Over the next few weeks, my dad kept calling. Sometimes he'd text pictures, old ones of me as a kid with my mom, or of her baking with my cousins. Like nostalgia could smooth over the damage. Then he sent one of her holding a box of toys. He wrote, "She's been saving these for Sophie and Caleb." That one almost broke me. Laura saw me staring at the photo one night. She put her hand on mine and said softly, "If you want to see her, you can. I'll never stop you." I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the toys, some old plastic figures, a stuffed dog, a puzzle box, the kind of thing my mom would keep in her closet, hoping one day the kids would come over again. 2 weeks later, I agreed to meet her, alone. We met at a diner halfway between our towns. The same place she used to take me after Little League games when I was a kid. She looked smaller somehow, older than I remembered. Her hair had gone more gray than blonde, and there were deep lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before. "Hi, Danny," she said, smiling like nothing had happened. I sat down across from her. "Hey, Mom." The waitress came and we ordered coffee. The silence after she left was unbearable. Finally, she said, "I didn't realize things had gotten so bad. I just thought—" She trailed off. "I thought you'd come around, Mom," I said quietly. "You told my wife she wasn't good enough for me. You've criticized her every time we've seen you. You refuse to apologize." "I did apologize," she said, her voice rising a little. "I sent her a letter." "That wasn't an apology," I said. "That was you saying you were sorry she felt offended." "That's not the same thing." Her eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. Not the performative kind she used to pull out during arguments. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You start," I told her. By meaning it. We sat there for almost an hour. She tried. I'll give her that. She told me she'd been scared of losing me. That she never meant to alienate Laura. That she was raised to believe wives should act a certain way. "I guess I didn't realize times had changed," she said. "It wasn't perfect, but it was something that night. I told Laura everything. She listened quietly, her hand on my knee the whole time. When I was done, she said, 'I'm proud of you. That couldn't have been easy.'" I asked her if she'd ever want to see my mom again. She didn't answer right away, then said, "Maybe, but not yet, so now." We're in this strange middle ground. My mom and I text sometimes. Nothing deep. Just pictures of the garden, updates about the kids' school projects, stuff like that. She doesn't mention Laura, and I don't bring it up. It's fragile, but peaceful. The kids know Grandma again, but only through FaceTime for now. Laura listens from the other room sometimes, just to make sure things are okay. Sophie calls her Grandma D. Caleb doesn't remember her well enough to feel awkward. He's just excited anyone wants to see his dinosaur drawings. Sometimes I think maybe this is the best we can do. Not forgiveness, exactly, but understanding, and maybe that's enough. Because family isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about deciding what you'll do with it, whether you'll let it ruin you or teach you to do better. I still don't know if my mom and Laura will ever really make peace. But for the first time in a long time, it feels like we're all at least facing the same direction. And maybe after everything, that's what healing actually looks like. A year passed before anything major happened again. Life had settled into something that finally felt normal. The kids were older. Sophie was in 2nd grade. Caleb had just started kindergarten. And Laura and I had fallen into a rhythm that felt like peace. My mom and I still talked occasionally, but we kept things light. She'd send holiday cards, sometimes a photo of her garden or a new recipe she'd tried, and I'd reply with pictures of the kids. But she and Laura hadn't spoken directly in over 2 years. That changed the week before Thanksgiving. It started with a phone call from my dad. His voice was tight, like he was trying not to say something. "Your mom isn't doing great," he said after a pause. My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "She's fine. Physically," he said quickly. "Just lonely. It's been hard for her, Danny. The holidays are rough. She keeps talking about wanting to see the grandkids. I think she's finally ready to apologize properly." I didn't say anything. I just stared out the window at the backyard, watching Caleb chase the dog in circles. That night, I told Laura about the call. She didn't say much, she just listened. After a long silence, she sighed and said, "If she's really ready to make amends, I'll hear her out. But it has to be genuine this time, no half apologies. No pretending nothing happened." So we set a date, Thanksgiving weekend. My parents would come for dinner on Saturday. The day after, the morning of, I felt like I was 16 again. Waiting for the principal to call me into the office, my stomach was in knots. Laura was calm, almost too calm, and she'd spent the morning cooking, which I think was her way of keeping her hands busy. The kids were excited, mostly because they thought Grandma D was bringing gifts. When the doorbell rang, Caleb ran to open it before I could stop him. My mom stood there holding a pumpkin pie, wearing a deep red sweater and a nervous smile. My dad was right behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder like he was steadying her. Laura wiped her hands on a towel and came to the door. For a moment, the two women just looked at each other. Years of resentment, hurt, and distance packed into that silence. Then my mom said quietly, "Hi, Laura." "Hi, Denise," Laura replied. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was a start. Dinner was awkward at first. The kids filled most of the space with chatter. Sophie showing Grandma her art projects. Caleb explaining his dinosaur collection in great detail. My dad helped Laura with dishes, and every once in a while, I'd catch my mom looking around the house like she was cataloging all the moments she'd missed. When dessert came out, she cleared her throat and asked if she could say something. Laura nodded slowly. My mom turned to her and said, "I owe you a real apology, not the kind where I make excuses. I said terrible things to you. Things that came from my own pride and fear. Not truth. You didn't deserve that, and I was wrong." Her voice cracked halfway through, and she kept going anyway. "You're a wonderful mother. You've built a beautiful family, and I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you weren't good enough to be part of it." Laura just stared at her for a few seconds. Then, finally she said, "Thank you." It wasn't a grand emotional moment. No tears, no dramatic music, just two women sitting across from each other at my kitchen table, deciding maybe this was the first step toward peace. After dinner, my mom helped Sophie wash dishes, and Caleb dragged my dad to the living room to play with his toy cars. Laura and I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them. "She really meant it this time," Laura said softly. "I think so too." We didn't talk much more about it that night, but something shifted. It wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was the first time I'd seen Laura's shoulders relax when my mom's name came up. Over the next few months, my mom started visiting more often. Small, casual visits. She brought cookies for the kids, asked Laura for recipes, offered to help with gardening. She still stumbled sometimes, saying things that made Laura roll her eyes. But she caught herself now. She was trying, one evening in late spring. We were all outside having a small cookout. My mom was sitting on the patio with Laura, both of them laughing about how Caleb had tried to grill a marshmallow with a stick and a flashlight. It hit me all at once. This peace I hadn't felt in years. Later that night, when everyone had gone home and the kids were in bed, Laura turned to me and said, "You know, I never thought I'd see the day where I could say this, but your mom's actually kind of growing on me." I laughed, half in disbelief. "Really?" "Yeah," she said. "She still has her moments, but she's different, and I think she really does love the kids." She paused, then added, "And she loves you. She's just learning how to do it the right way now." That stuck with me, because she was right. Love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, over and over again, to show up, to admit when you've been wrong, and to keep trying. It's been almost 2 years since that Thanksgiving dinner now. My mom and Laura aren't best friends or anything, but they've built something. Respect, understanding, maybe even affection. The kids adore their grandma, and she's careful now about boundaries. She checks in before visiting, never oversteps, and thanks Laura for every meal. Sometimes, when I watch them all together, I think about how close I came to cutting her out for good, and how maybe, just maybe, letting her back in was the right call. Because it's not about pretending the past didn't happen, it's about what you do next. And sometimes, forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a long, quiet process of choosing peace, one dinner, one apology, one act of grace at a time. And now, for the first time in years, I finally feel like my family is whole again. Imperfect, scarred but whole. Stories number 3. He's more interested in streamers than me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to feel jealous over people on a screen. But here I am. I've been with my boyfriend, Ryan, for 5 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, hit it off immediately, and for the longest time, I thought we were one of those couples who just got each other. We moved in together 3 years ago, share bills, plan trips, and have talked about getting married someday. But lately, something's changed. Or maybe he's changed. It started during the pandemic, when everyone was home more. Ryan got really into Twitch. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, he's a gamer, always has been, and I figured it was just another hobby. He started following a few streamers, and I'd even watch with him sometimes. It was fun at first. Kind of like watching a friend play and joke around, but gradually it became something else. At first, it was small stuff. He'd bring up random facts about these streamers like they were people he personally knew. "Oh, did you know Amber finally hit 1 million followers? Or Luna's cat died last week, poor thing." I'd nod along, but internally, I was a little thrown. He wasn't just watching, he was emotionally invested. Then the donations started. I noticed random $5 or $10 charges on our shared account. When I asked, he shrugged it off, saying, "It's just tipping content creators, babe. Like buying a coffee for someone." But those small donations started adding up. When I gently mentioned that maybe we should budget those expenses, he got defensive. "It's my money too," he said. "And besides, it's harmless. Harmless." That's the word that started grating on me. Because it didn't feel harmless. It escalated from there. He joined their Discord servers, started engaging with their communities, and even bought merch. Shirts, hoodies, stickers, you name it. He began scheduling his evenings around their streams, which meant if I wanted to have dinner together or go out, I had to work around their streaming schedule. And if I complained, he'd tell me I was being dramatic or controlling. I remember one night vividly. We were supposed to have a date night, just us, cooking dinner and watching a movie. But at the last minute, one of the streamers announced a subathon, meaning she'd be streaming for as long as she kept getting donations. Ryan canceled our plans without hesitation. He sat on the couch for hours, laughing, chatting in the stream, sending donations every so often. I eventually went to bed alone. It wasn't just the time, though it was the attention, the compliments, the way he talked about these women like they were the most interesting, funny, talented people he'd ever seen. "She's just so genuine," he said once about one of them. "You can tell she really cares about her fans." I bit my tongue so hard that night I tasted blood. I know it's not cheating, at least not physically, but emotionally. I don't know anymore. I feel invisible in my own relationship. A few weeks ago, we went to a friend's wedding. He spent most of the reception on his phone, watching a stream under the table. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Babe, you're overreacting. It's background noise." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him and say, "Look at me. I'm right here," but I didn't. I just walked outside and cried in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Last week was the breaking point. I came home early from work and found him in our office with his headset on, grinning ear to ear, talking in the chat. The streamer had said his username out loud, thanking him for a $50 donation, and he looked genuinely starstruck. I stood there for a moment, watching him smile in a way I hadn't seen him smile at me in months. Last week was the breaking point. I came home early from work and found him in our office with his headset on, grinning ear to ear, talking in the chat. The streamer had said his username out loud, thanking him for a $50 donation, and he looked genuinely starstruck. I stood there for a moment, watching him smile in a way I hadn't seen him smile at me in months. When I finally said his name, he jumped and quickly minimized the screen, like he'd been caught watching something he shouldn't. I didn't yell. I just asked, "Do you even see how this makes me feel?" He sighed and said, "You're making this into something it's not. You're insecure, and that's not my fault." That line hit me like a punch to the gut, because maybe he's right. Maybe I am insecure. But is it really insecurity if your partner's emotional energy is being poured into strangers on the internet instead of you? I tried to talk to him again later, more calmly, explaining that I felt neglected and uncomfortable with how much time and money he was spending on these women. He rolled his eyes and said, "So I can't have hobbies now? Do you want me to stop watching sports too?" That comparison made me furious. Watching a game isn't the same as interacting with women who call you sweetheart for a $10 donation. But I swallowed it down because I didn't want to fight again. That night, I lay awake next to him, scrolling through my own phone. My feed was full of pictures of couples, people out to dinner, on trips, smiling. I looked over at Ryan, who was snoring softly, his phone still open to a Twitch chat, the little donation badge next to his name shining like a scarlet letter. I don't know how to fix this. I love him. Or at least I love who he was. But I'm starting to feel like I'm in competition with an entire digital world I can't beat. I can't be a streamer who flirts for donations or thanks him by name in front of thousands of people. I'm just me, the woman who cooks him dinner, folds his laundry, and wants him to look at her like he used to. I've thought about leaving. I really have. But part of me keeps hoping he'll realize what he's doing before it's too late. That maybe one day he'll close the stream, look at me, and finally see me again. Right now, though, I feel like I'm living with a stranger who's in love with a fantasy, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend that doesn't hurt. It's been a few months since I wrote about Ryan and his obsession with Twitch streamers, and honestly, things have changed. But not in the way I hoped. After that night where I caught him smiling at his computer screen, something inside me started to shift. I stopped trying to compete. I stopped trying to win back his attention with cute dates or extra effort. I just got quiet. I think a part of me realized that if he couldn't see the problem, I couldn't keep screaming into a void. At first, he didn't even notice that I'd withdrawn. He still spent most of his nights in the office, headset on, chatting and laughing. I'd sit in the living room alone, watching shows he used to love with me, eating dinner by myself. Sometimes I'd hear him through the walls. That cheerful, excited tone he hadn't used with me in months. It made my chest ache every time. One night, I finally asked him to have dinner with me. Just dinner. No phones, no streams, nothing, he agreed. But halfway through the meal, he started glancing at his phone. When I called him out, he admitted one of the streamers was doing a meet and greet in Los Angeles, and he wanted to see if he could go. I felt this weird, nauseating mix of anger and heartbreak. He didn't even hesitate to say it in front of me. I asked him if he realized how inappropriate that sounded, given everything we'd already talked about. He shrugged and said, "It's not like I'm cheating. You're seriously blowing this out of proportion," I snapped then. I told him that emotional cheating was still cheating, that when you give your time, your admiration, your money, and your affection to someone else, it leaves nothing for the person you're actually with. He rolled his eyes again and said, "You're jealous of someone who doesn't even know I exist. Do you realize how crazy that sounds?" That was the last real conversation we had for a while. After that, I started sleeping in the guest room. I didn't even tell him, I just quietly moved my stuff. He barely noticed at first. The first night he came in looking for me. I told him I needed space. He sighed, muttered something about me being dramatic, and went back to his stream. A week later, he messaged me while I was at work to ask if I could Venmo him $75. When I asked why, he said he'd run out of funds and wanted to support a stream. That was the final straw. When I got home that night, I told him we needed to talk seriously. I said I couldn't keep living like this, like a ghost in my own relationship. I told him that if he couldn't recognize how much this was hurting me, we needed to end things. He laughed. Actually laughed, said, "You're going to break up with me over some girls on Twitch?" And I said, "No. I'm breaking up with you because you stopped showing up for our relationship a long time ago." That shut him up. For the first time in months, he didn't have a comeback. The next few days were strange. He didn't fight me on it. He didn't beg me to stay, he just went quiet. He slept on the couch while I packed my things. There was no big argument, no tears, just silence. I moved out 2 weeks later and got a small one-bedroom apartment closer to my job. The first night I spent there, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I ordered takeout, put on music, and realized I could finally breathe without wondering what stream was playing in the background. A few weeks after moving, I heard through mutual friends that Ryan went to that LA meetup. Apparently, he got a selfie with the streamer he used to gush about. He even posted it online with some cringe caption about meeting his favorite creator. I didn't even feel angry, just sad. Sad that the person I used to love had turned into someone who found more joy in pixels than real life. It's been a few months now, and I'm doing better. I'm going to therapy, started painting again, and even joined a book club. I've realized how much of myself I lost trying to compete with people who didn't even know I existed. Sometimes I still think about Ryan, about how we used to laugh until we cried, or stay up talking until 2 a.m. before all this started. But then I remember the lonely dinners, the empty conversations, the constant feeling of being replaced by someone on a screen, and I know I made the right choice. If there's one thing I've learned from this, it's that emotional neglect doesn't always come from cheating or fighting. Sometimes it's the slow drift of someone choosing something else, someone else, over you every day until you're just an afterthought. And I don't ever want to feel like that again. It's been a little over a year since I left Ryan, and I can finally say I'm not angry anymore. For a long time, I carried this heavy mix of resentment and sadness, wondering how someone who once cared so deeply could turn so distant. But time really does dull the edges. What used to feel like rejection now feels like release. After I moved out, I spent a few months basically rebuilding my sense of self. The silence in that little apartment was deafening at first, but it became comforting. I could eat when I wanted, watch what I wanted, sleep whenever. No half-heard laughter coming from the office. No waiting for him to finish one more game before bed. I didn't realize how exhausting it had been to compete for someone's attention every day until it was gone. I started going to therapy regularly. My therapist, Laura, helped me see how much of my self-worth I had tied up in the idea of being the cool girlfriend. The one who doesn't nag, who gives her partner space, who understands his hobbies. I bent so much to fit into Ryan's world that I didn't notice how much smaller mine was becoming. At work, people started noticing a difference. I was more focused, more present. One of my coworkers, Ethan, invited me to join a trivia team that met every Wednesday at a local bar. I said yes, mostly to push myself to socialize again. That little group became something I looked forward to each week. We'd argue about random movie facts, laugh too loudly, order too many nachos. It reminded me what genuine connection felt like. Something Ryan and I hadn't had in years. Then, maybe 6 months after the breakup, Ryan reached out. It was a random Tuesday night, and his name popped up on my phone. I froze for a second before opening the message. He said something like, "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything." I stared at it for a long time. He didn't elaborate. No explanation, no attempt to get back together, just that. I typed out several versions of a reply, then deleted them all. In the end, I just said, "I hope you're doing okay." That was it. He never responded, and I never reached out again. Later, I found out through mutual friends that he'd had a rough time after I left. Apparently, the streaming obsession got worse before it got better. He'd lost his job for missing deadlines, and one of his online friends had basically scammed him out of a few $100s. I didn't feel satisfaction, just pity. It was sad watching someone drown in the thing they refused to admit was pulling them under. Meanwhile, my life slowly started feeling like mine again. I picked up painting seriously, and even sold a few pieces at a local art fair. I reconnected with my sister, who told me she'd always worried I was disappearing while I was with Ryan. Hearing that broke my heart a little, but it was also a reminder of how much I'd come back to myself. And yes, I did start dating again, about 9 months after the breakup. His name is Ben. We met through that trivia group. Actually, he's quiet but funny, and he listens. I mean, really listens. He doesn't play games with his attention, doesn't make me feel like I'm competing with a screen. When we're together, he's just there. That's something I'll never take for granted again. A few weeks ago, Ryan's name came up again. Someone mentioned he'd deleted all his social media and was taking a break from online stuff. Maybe he finally realized how far things had gone. I hope so. I don't hate him and I don't wish him harm. I just hope he finds whatever peace he couldn't find while he was chasing people who never even saw him. If I'm being honest, I learned a lot from that relationship. Mostly about myself, about boundaries, about what emotional neglect really looks like, and about how love shouldn't make you feel invisible. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about how it all started. The inside jokes, the long drives, the comfort of thinking I'd found my person. But then I remember how it ended. Me sitting alone in a quiet living room while he laughed with strangers through a glowing screen. That image always reminds me that love can't survive when one person stops showing up. Now, when I paint, I sometimes include a little blue light in the corner of my canvases, not as a reminder of him, but as a symbol, the way a small glow can feel so captivating. Even while it pulls your attention away from everything that truly matters, I guess. In the end, that's what our relationship was. A soft, flickering light that I mistook for warmth. Stories number 4. When your marriage starts to feel like a third person lives in it. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to give an ultimatum in a marriage. I've always believed that love, respect, and compromise could fix just about anything. But after years of being the one making all the compromises, I hit a wall I didn't even know existed. My husband, Eric, is an amazing man in many ways. He's kind, dependable, and a devoted son. The problem is that last part, devoted son, has slowly started to consume every other role he's supposed to have. His mom, Karen, is 64 and has advanced rheumatoid arthritis. She's been disabled for several years now and uses a wheelchair. Before anyone assumes the worst, let me be clear. I don't hate her. I feel genuine sympathy for her situation. She was always independent and active before her illness. But somewhere along the line, that sympathy turned into resentment. Not toward her condition, but toward the way Eric has made our lives revolve around it. When we got married 6 years ago, we lived about 40 minutes away from her. She was still fairly mobile then, so visits were weekly or bi-weekly. But as her condition worsened, those visits became longer and more frequent. Eventually, she moved in with us temporarily after a bad fall. That was 3 years ago. She never left at first. I told myself it was the right thing to do. She needed help, and Eric is her only child. We had the space, and I wanted to be supportive. I figured we'd figure out a rhythm instead. Her being here completely redefined what our family rhythm even was. We have 2 kids, Olivia, 8, and Ethan, 5. They're sweet, loud, messy, and full of life. But every time something comes up, a soccer game, a school concert, even just a movie night, it somehow takes a back seat to Karen's needs. If she has a doctor's appointment, everything stops. If she feels lonely, Eric drops what he's doing, even if it's bedtime for the kids. If she needs something from the store, He'll run out at 10 p.m. without hesitation. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm running this household on autopilot. The meals, the schoolwork, the laundry, the appointments, everything. Eric tells me constantly that he appreciates all I do, but it's always followed by, Mom just needs me a little more right now. But right now has become 3 years. I've tried to talk to him calmly. I've told him how I feel left out, how the kids need their dad's time too, how I'm emotionally exhausted every time. He looks guilty and promises to do better. And he does, for maybe a week. Then something happens with Karen. And it's right back to square one, a few months ago. The breaking point started to take shape. It was Olivia's spring recital. She'd been practicing for weeks, playing her little violin every night until my ears were ringing with Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. She was nervous and excited, and all she wanted was her dad to see her perform. The morning of the recital, Karen woke up complaining about joint pain. Nothing new. It happens all the time. But this time, she said she didn't feel comfortable being alone. Eric immediately said, I'll stay with her. You go to the recital and record it. I stared at him like he'd just slapped me. Eric, this is her first recital. She's been talking about you being there for weeks. He sighed. I know, but she's in pain, babe. She can't even move right now. I can call a nurse, I said. Or your aunt. Or we can even reschedule her checkup for tomorrow. He shook his head. You don't get it. Mom needs me right now. Olivia overheard part of it. She came into the kitchen holding her violin case and said quietly, It's okay, Daddy. You can just watch it later. I could have cried right there. I went alone. Sat in the audience with other parents cheering for their kids, while mine kept glancing at the empty seat next to me. When she walked off stage, she looked right past me, scanning the crowd one last time for her dad. When I got home that night, Eric was sitting on the couch watching TV with his mom. She looked comfortable, fine even. Something snapped in me then. I walked up to him and said, Eric, if you don't start prioritizing your kids and me over your mother, I swear I'm going to leave. He turned pale. What? Are you serious? Dead serious, I said. Because I can't keep living like this. You're her son, not her caretaker, and not her emotional support animal. You're my husband, and you're Olivia and Ethan's dad, but you're barely here for any of us anymore. Karen immediately chimed in, her voice sharp. How dare you speak like that about me in my own house? Your own house? I repeated, trying not to lose it. This is our house, mine and Eric's, and I'm the one paying most of the bills because your son spends all his time playing nurse instead of helping with his family. She gasped, and Eric jumped up, telling me I was being cruel. I stormed off, shaking. That night I slept in the guest room. He didn't come after me. The next morning, he said we needed to talk calmly. He apologized for missing Olivia's recital, said he didn't realize how bad it had gotten. He said he'd start making more time for us, that he didn't want to lose me. I wanted to believe him so badly. But I'd heard it all before. The difference this time is that I meant my threat. Since then I've been distant, not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. I cook dinner, take care of the kids, go to work, come home, and barely speak to him unless it's about something practical. The saddest part? The kids are starting to notice. Olivia asked me last week, Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced? I froze. Why do you ask that, honey? She shrugged. Because you don't laugh together anymore. That hit harder than anything else. Last weekend, Eric tried to fix things by planning a family outing to the zoo. I appreciated the effort. I really did. But Karen called halfway through the morning saying she felt dizzy. He panicked, apologized, and left us there. I spent the rest of the day pushing a double stroller by myself, surrounded by families who actually felt like families. That night, I told him I'm not doing this anymore. I told him I love him, but I'm done being second to someone who already had her life, who already had her chance to raise a family. It's my turn now, he cried. Said he'd talk to a social worker, maybe get in home care for her. I told him that was a start, but I needed to see it, not just hear it. So that's where I am now, waiting, watching, trying to decide if there's still a marriage left to save. I feel like the worst person in the world for making him choose. But the truth is, I didn't create this choice. I've just been living inside of it for years, and I don't know how much longer I can stay. It's been a little over 3 weeks since I told Eric that I was done living like this. And honestly, I'm still not sure which direction things are heading. For the first time in a long while, he actually seemed shaken. He didn't brush it off with empty apologies or guilt trips. He didn't even get defensive, which shocked me. He just sat there quietly, looking like a man who had finally realized that something he loved was slipping away. For the first week, he went into full fix-it mode. He started calling agencies about in-home care for his mom, talking to social workers, even researching respite programs. I didn't ask him to do it. He just did. And at first I thought maybe this is it. Maybe he finally understands that we can't keep doing this, but Karen made sure it wouldn't be easy. When she found out Eric was looking into getting outside help, she completely lost it. I came home from work to find her in tears, yelling at him in the living room. "You're just throwing me away," she cried. "After everything I've done for you, now you want strangers in my house?" Eric was trying to calm her down, but his voice was shaking. "Mom, no one's throwing you away. I need help. I can't do everything." "You don't need help," she snapped. "You just need to stop listening to her." She glared at me when I walked in, her eyes full of venom. I didn't say a word. I just walked past them and went straight to our room. I could hear Eric trying to defend me, but she wouldn't have it. She started crying harder, wailing about how she knew this would happen and how I wanted her gone from the start. That night, Eric and I didn't speak. He stayed with her until late, helping her calm down, and by the time he crawled into bed, I was already pretending to be asleep. The next morning, I got up early to make breakfast for the kids. Eric came into the kitchen, eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked at me like he wanted to say something, but all that came out was, "She thinks I'm abandoning her." I just said, "You're not. You're just trying to be a husband and a father, too." He nodded, but didn't say anything else. Over the next few days, he kept trying to balance both worlds, but it was impossible. Every time he made progress with setting up a care plan, Karen would either cry, refuse to eat, or say something manipulative like, "If you don't want me here, I can just go live in a nursing home and die alone." It was emotionally draining for everyone. At one point, he even canceled the in-home evaluation because she wasn't ready for strangers in her space. I was furious. I didn't yell this time. I just shut down. I stopped trying to talk about it, stopped offering solutions. I focused on the kids and my job. It's strange how quickly love can start to fade when exhaustion takes over. I still cared about him deeply, but it felt like caring for someone who refused to take their own hand out of the fire. You can't save a person who keeps walking back into the flames. A few nights later, I overheard a conversation that broke me a little. I had just put Ethan to bed when I passed by Karen's room and heard her whispering to Eric. "She's going to leave you, you know," she said softly. "That's what women like her do. They don't stay when things get hard. I stayed with your father through everything, and this is the thanks I get? Watching my son throw me away for a woman who can't handle a little responsibility?" Eric didn't respond at first. Then he said, "Mom, that's not fair. She's not the enemy. She doesn't love you like I do," Karen said. "She just wants the easy life." That night, I cried in the shower so the kids wouldn't hear me. The next morning, Eric tried to act normal, but I couldn't look at him the same. I was tired of being made the villain for wanting a family that didn't orbit around someone else's suffering. About a week later, everything came to a head. Eric was at work when Karen called him saying she'd fallen while trying to transfer from her wheelchair to the bed. He rushed home in a panic, and of course, called me to come too. I left work early and got there just as the paramedics were leaving. She was fine, just a bruised hip. But she made it sound like the end of the world. When Eric helped her settle back into bed, she said, "See? This is why I can't have strangers around. I need you, Eric. Only you know how to help me." And he looked at me with this helpless, guilty expression, like a child caught between two parents fighting. Later that night, I told him that this wasn't sustainable, that the kids were growing up watching their dad devote himself to a life that wasn't his own, that Olivia shouldn't have to whisper to her brother, "Daddy can't come. Grandma needs him again," I told him. "Eric, I love you. But love isn't enough when you refuse to build a life with me." "You're building one with her," he cried. Real tears, not the kind that come from guilt, he said. "I don't know how to choose." And I said, "You already have been choosing every single day." That was 2 days ago right now. He's staying with his mom at her sister's place for a few nights to think. The house is quiet, and it feels eerie, not peaceful exactly, but like I can breathe for the first time in years. Olivia asked where Daddy was, and I told her he needed a few days to figure some things out. She nodded, then hugged me and said, "I just want us all to be happy." I wish it were that simple. I don't know what Eric will decide, and I'm not sure what I'll do if he comes back with more empty promises. I've been checking apartments online, just in case. Not to scare him, not to manipulate him. just because I need a backup plan for myself and the kids. I'm scared. I don't want to be a single mom. And I don't want to break up our family. But I can't keep raising my children in a home where they see their father emotionally chained to someone else. I keep thinking back to our wedding vows. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, and realizing that sometimes the sickness isn't just in the body. It's in the boundaries we never learned to set. And if I have to be the one to break that cycle, I will. Even if it means breaking my own heart in the process. It's been nearly 2 months since Eric left to think. At first, I didn't think he'd actually stay away that long. I honestly believed he'd call after a few days, apologize, promise to set new boundaries with his mom, and come home. That's what he always did. Run away from confrontation, then patch things over just enough to keep the peace. But this time was different. He didn't call. He didn't text. He'd check in with the kids occasionally, a few short video calls where he looked exhausted and broken. But there was no talk about us, no apologies, no explanations, just distance. The silence was loud. At first I was angry. Then slowly, I started to feel something else. Peace. It was like stepping out of a fog I didn't realize I'd been in. I started cooking dinner just for the kids and me, playing music in the kitchen again, laughing without feeling like I needed to keep my voice down so I wouldn't stress him out. The house felt lighter, even though it was emptier. After a few weeks, Eric finally called me one evening. His voice was shaky, nervous, like he didn't know how to start. "Can we talk?" he asked. He came over that night after the kids went to bed. I met him at the door, and for the first time, I noticed how tired he looked. Not physically, but soul-tired. We sat in the living room in silence for a while before he finally said, "She won't let go." I didn't respond, I just waited. "She refuses to have outside help," he said. "Every time I mention it, she either cries or stops eating, and I can't just walk away from her. But I also can't keep losing you." There was a long pause. Then he said something I never expected. "I moved some of my things out of her house." I blinked. "What?" I told her I needed space, that I couldn't live like this anymore. She said I was ungrateful, that I was letting you control me. But I told her it wasn't about control. It was about finally choosing my own life. He rubbed his face and looked at me, eyes wet. "I know I've hurt you. I let my mother dictate everything. Our marriage, our family, my priorities, and I don't blame you if you can't forgive me. But I want to fix this. For real this time." It was like my body didn't know whether to cry or scream. I'd waited years for him to say something like that. But now that he finally had, I didn't know what to feel. I asked him, "What does fix this mean, Eric?" "Because you've said that before," he nodded. "It means getting real help for her. Professional care, even if she hates me for it. It means therapy for both of us, marriage counseling, individual counseling, whatever it takes. And it means being a father first, a husband second, a son third." For the first time I believed him. Not because he said the right words, but because he finally looked like a man who understood what losing everything really meant. The following week, he followed through. He contacted an in-home nursing agency and scheduled a care consultation. And he didn't cancel it this time. When the nurse showed up at Karen's house, she cried, screamed, even threw a glass. But Eric didn't back down. He stood his ground. The nurse called me afterward to confirm his contact info. And she said quietly, "Your husband loves you." You can tell. Karen didn't speak to Eric for almost 2 weeks after that. She refused care at first, then reluctantly allowed a nurse to come 3 days a week. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Eric moved back home around that time. It was strange at first. The house felt unfamiliar with him in it again. Like we were learning how to live together from scratch. There were moments when I still felt angry. Moments when I caught myself waiting for him to choose her again, but he didn't. He started showing up, really showing up, picking the kids up from school, cooking dinner on nights I worked late, even taking me out on small dates like we used to. We talked more, fought less. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't immediate, but it felt real this time. Then one night, something unexpected happened. Karen called me. "Not Eric, me," she said. "I owe you an apology." I almost didn't believe my ears. She went on, voice softer than I'd ever heard. "I didn't realize how much I was taking from him. From all of you. I just didn't want to be forgotten." I didn't know what to say. The anger I'd been holding onto for years suddenly didn't have anywhere to go. I just said, "I never wanted to take him away from you. I just wanted him to have a life that wasn't only about you." There was silence on her end for a moment. Then she said, "He deserves that, and so do you." It wasn't a grand reconciliation. We didn't suddenly become best friends. But it was enough to let some of the bitterness fade. Now, 2 months later, things aren't perfect. But they're good. We're learning to be partners again, to rebuild trust, to parent as a team. Eric still visits his mom regularly, but she has her care workers. And he doesn't feel like her caretaker anymore. Last week, Olivia drew a picture of our family. The four of us holding hands, smiling. She even drew Grandma in her own little house beside us. When I asked her about it, she said, "See, now everyone's happy where they're supposed to be." And for the first time in years, I think she's right. If this whole thing taught me anything, it's that love can't survive without boundaries. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do for someone you love is stop enabling their comfort at the cost of your own peace. Eric and I still have a lot to work through, but this time, we're doing it together, not as a son and a mother's caretaker, but as a husband and a wife trying to finally live their own story. And that, I think, is enough. Stories number 5. The purse incident that somehow made me the villain. This happened about a month ago, but it's been replaying in my head ever since, and the more I think about it, the more ridiculous it feels. I, 27M, was just trying to do something decent for a stranger, but somehow I ended up looking like the bad guy. I was at a coffee shop downtown on a rainy Thursday morning. One of those places with indie music, too many succulents and way too few tables. I go there a lot before work because it's near the design firm where I work as a junior architect. I'd just grabbed my drink when I noticed a woman walking out ahead of me, juggling a tote bag, her phone, and one of those ridiculously big purses. As she pushed the door open, her purse slipped off her shoulder and hit the floor, but she didn't notice. I picked it up and called out, "Hey, excuse me, you dropped your purse." She turned around, tall, blonde, maybe mid-30s, wearing a business suit and heels. She looked me up and down, her nose scrunching like she'd smelled something bad. Then, with a disgusted tone, she said, "You know, don't touch my stuff," like, full-on disgusted. I froze for a second. Still holding the purse, everyone near the door went quiet. Even the barista looked over. I said, "You dropped it." And she just crossed her arms and said, "Put it down. Now." I don't know if she thought I was trying to steal it, or if she was just having a bad day, but that "you" hit me in a way I didn't expect. I'm not dirty. I wasn't dressed weird. I had just gotten off the bus, wearing a clean hoodie, jeans, and holding my coffee like any other person. I said again, "I was just trying to help." But she cut me off with this fake, dismissive smile and said, "I said put it down, so I did. I just dropped it." Right on the floor in front of her. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't throw it or anything. But the sound of it hitting the tile floor echoed, and her face went red. She gasped like I'd just slapped her. Then she muttered, "Unbelievable," grabbed her purse, and stormed out into the rain. The barista and a few people in line just stared. Then one guy near the door, older, maybe in his 50s, said, "Man, some people are just rude," and nodded at me. I shrugged and left because I was embarrassed. The whole bus ride to work, I kept thinking, did I do something wrong? Later, when I told my coworker, Kelly, she laughed so hard she nearly spit out her coffee. She said, "You should have handed it to her with tongs." But another coworker, Josh, said, "Dude, you didn't have to drop it like that. You could have just set it down." That's what's been bothering me. I didn't slam it or anything, but maybe dropping it came off as petty? Anyway, here's where it gets weird. The next day, I went back to that same coffee shop, and she was there, sitting at a corner table, typing on her laptop. I froze the second I saw her. Our eyes met. And I could tell she recognized me because she rolled her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck. I decided to just ignore her and went to grab my coffee. But as I waited, I heard her telling the barista, loudly, that some guy had manhandled her purse the day before, and that she felt unsafe. Unsafe. I almost turned around to say something, but then I caught myself. The last thing I needed was to start an argument in a coffee shop. So I just grabbed my drink and left. Since then, I've run into her twice more around that same area. Once at the crosswalk, and once in line at the grocery store. She gave me the dirtiest look both times, like I'd committed some huge moral crime by returning her purse. It's such a small, stupid moment, but it stuck with me. I tried to do something nice, got insulted. And when I didn't respond with endless grace, somehow I'm the rude one. I told my sister Amanda about it when she was visiting last weekend, and she said something that made me think. She said, "Some people walk through life like everyone else is beneath them. You can't teach them humility by being polite. Sometimes they only learn when someone mirrors it back. I don't know. I didn't mean to mirror anything. I was just tired of being treated like a piece of trash for doing the right thing. What's wild is that I keep imagining the alternate version of events. Like, what if I'd said, okay, and gently placed it on the counter? She probably still would have rolled her eyes. Or if I'd chased her down the street, she might have accused me of following her. There's no winning in that kind of situation. I think what really got under my skin was the you. It wasn't just the word. It was the way she said it, like I was contaminated. It hit this weird nerve I didn't even know I had. I've been the quiet guy my whole life, the type people talk over or ignore. So I guess something in me just snapped that day. But the part that bugs me most, every time I go back to that cafe now, I half expect to see her again. And half of me wants to, just so I can hand her a napkin with you written on it. I won't, obviously, but damn, it's tempting anyway. I'm curious, if someone sneered at you like that while you were just trying to help, would you still have handed them their purse gently? Or would you have dropped it too? Because I swear, that little thud when it hit the floor was the most satisfying sound I've heard all year. About 3 weeks after the purse incident, I honestly thought the whole thing had blown over. I'd stopped going to that specific coffee shop for a bit, partly because I didn't want another awkward run-in, and partly because I'd convinced myself that avoiding drama was better than feeding it. But life has a twisted sense of humor, and of course, the universe decided I hadn't learned my lesson yet. Our firm got hired to collaborate on a mixed-use development project. Part residential, part retail, just a few blocks from that same cafe. The project was a big deal for us, and our team was supposed to meet with the client's legal and property consultants to go over zoning and compliance. Guess who one of the consultants turned out to be? Yep, Purse Lady. Her name, as it turns out, is Lydia Monroe. And the second she walked into the conference room, my soul nearly left my body. She was in a navy suit, hair tied back neatly. All business, the same face, the same confident, borderline smug posture, and then her eyes landed on me. You could see the flicker of recognition immediately. That tiny twitch of her mouth. The quick inhale, but she didn't say a word. Just looked at me for a second too long, then gave this polite but strained nice to meet you to the whole table. Skipping my name like I was invisible, the meeting went on as usual. Or at least, as close to usual as it could get when someone across the table is pretending you don't exist. Every time I made a suggestion or pointed to something on the plans, I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and judgmental. When we wrapped up, she gathered her things and said to my project manager, "I'll follow up with an updated compliance memo next week." Then she turned to me and said, with the fakest smile I've ever seen, "And thank you for your input." I swear there was an extra layer of sarcasm baked into that pause. After she left, Kelly, my coworker who I'd told about the original incident, leaned over and whispered, "Is that her?" I nodded. "Oh my God," she said, barely containing a laugh. "You weren't exaggerating. She has total I'm better than you energy." The next few weeks were a slow burn of weird tension. Every meeting we had with the consultants was awkward. Lydia and I never directly spoke, but we'd exchange these brief, loaded glances whenever we were forced to occupy the same space. Then one afternoon, I was grabbing a late lunch at a nearby sandwich shop, when I heard someone say my name. "Daniel, right?" I turned around. It was Lydia. Holding a salad and looking oddly hesitant, I braced for impact, ready for some passive-aggressive remark. But instead she said, "Can I sit?" I nodded slowly. We sat in silence for a moment before she sighed and said, "I think I owe you an apology. I nearly choked on my sandwich," she continued. "The day at the cafe, that wasn't about you. I was having a really awful morning. I'd just gotten off a call with my ex-husband and was late for a deposition. And when you picked up my bag, I just reacted." Her voice was quieter now, more human. "I shouldn't have said what I said," she added. "It was rude. You were just trying to help." I didn't know what to say. I think my brain was still processing the fact that she, the woman who said you to my face, was apologizing in a sandwich shop. So I said, "Thanks. That means a lot." Then I laughed, awkwardly. "You made me question if I'd accidentally committed some kind of social felony." She actually smiled at that. "No felony," she said. "Just bad manners on my part." We talked for maybe 15 minutes after that. Turns out she's a lawyer who specializes in land use and zoning. which explained the consultant gig. She's originally from Chicago, recently divorced and has a kid in middle school. She told me she'd been under a lot of pressure and wasn't proud of how she treated people during that time. Before she left, she said, "For what it's worth, you were right to drop it. I deserved it." And then she laughed, a genuine laugh, before walking out. When I told Kelly about it later, she nearly fell out of her chair. "Oh my God, she apologized?" "Yeah," I said. "Apparently she was going through stuff." Kelly raised an eyebrow. "Aren't we all?" "Fair point." Anyway, the project continued, and working with Lydia became a lot easier after that. She was still direct and a bit intimidating, but she started being friendlier, even cracking the occasional joke during meetings. She'd bring coffee for everyone sometimes, and once she actually asked if I wanted anything from the cafe across the street, the same cafe where it all started. "Sure," I said, smiling. "Just not anything in a purse," she snorted. "Fair. It's funny. I went from being publicly shamed by this woman to having mutual respect for her. Maybe even a strange kind of friendship. Looking back, I think about how easily that first encounter could have stuck as a permanent story in both our heads. That rude stranger, and that creepy guy who touched my stuff. But instead, we both got a second chance to see each other as human. And I'll admit, there's something humbling about realizing how often people's behavior has nothing to do with you at all. Sometimes you're just the unlucky bystander to someone else's bad day. Now, every time I see someone drop something in public, I still pick it up. But I always make eye contact first, and if they flinch or hesitate, I just smile and say, "It's okay, no use this time." Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they don't. But at least now I can laugh about it. Funny how the smallest, pettiest moments can end up teaching you the biggest lessons about grace. Both giving it and accepting it. It's been about a year since the purse incident, as my friends jokingly call it. And if you'd told me back then that Lydia and I would still be in each other's lives, and in a good way, I would have laughed you out of the room. But somehow, life has this way of weaving the strangest threads together into something that almost makes sense. After the project wrapped up, our firm ended up winning an award for sustainable design, and the city hosted this big networking event for everyone involved. I wasn't going to go. Those functions always feel a little forced. But Kelly insisted, saying, "You need to go and, actually act like a person with a social life." So I went, and who do I see about 5 minutes in, standing by the bar, talking to a group of city planners? Lydia. But this time, it wasn't awkward. She spotted me, smiled, and waved. A real smile. Not the tight, polite kind she used to give in meetings. She made her way over and said, "Hey, stranger. Haven't seen you in months." "Yeah," I said. "Guess that means neither of us dropped any purses lately." She laughed. "Not yet. We spent most of that night just catching up. Work, life, her son, my new project, somewhere between the second and third round of drinks. She mentioned she'd finally finalized her divorce. She said it not with bitterness, but with relief, like she could breathe again. "I feel like I've been trying to unlearn a decade of apologizing for existing," she said quietly. "It's weird starting over at 37. I nodded. "Weird, yeah, but not bad." She smiled at me in that way people do when they're seeing you differently than before, not as the stranger who picked up her purse, not as the co-worker in a meeting, but just a person. We kept in touch after that. Coffee turned into lunches. Lunches turned into occasional weekend walks when she had free time, and her son was with his dad. It wasn't romantic, not at first. But it was something solid, easy. We both knew what it was like to carry a lot of unspoken stuff, to try and keep your head above water while pretending you had it all together. A few months later, she invited me to her son's little league game. Said he wanted to meet the guy from Mom's office who makes her laugh. That hit me harder than I expected. Her son, Evan, was this sharp, funny 11-year-old who immediately sized me up like I was auditioning for a role I didn't know I'd been cast in. But by the end of the game, we were eating nachos and talking about his favorite baseball cards. Lydia watched us with that half-amused, half-proud look parents get when their kid actually likes someone they brought around. Afterward, when she was packing up their stuff, she said. You know, I never thought I'd let anyone new into Evan's life again. Not after everything. But you're safe. It caught me off guard. The word safe, I just said. That's a good thing, right? She smiled. It's the best thing. We didn't label anything for a while. It wasn't some whirlwind romance or movie script transformation. It was slow, careful, human. She'd come to my place with Evan sometimes to watch movies or have dinner, and it became this quiet rhythm that felt natural. A few weeks ago, Lydia and I went back to that same cafe where everything started, she insisted. I feel like we should officially close the circle, she said. We got our coffees and sat in the exact spot where she'd once said, you to me. Though now, she couldn't stop laughing about it. I still can't believe I said that, she said, shaking her head. You must have thought I was a complete monster. I smiled. I did. But, in my defense, you kind of were for like 5 seconds. She mock-gasped. 5 seconds? You're being generous. Then she got quiet for a moment and said, Thanks for not holding it against me. Most people would have just written me off. I tried, I admitted. Didn't stick. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. There wasn't some grand confession. No dramatic kiss under soft cafe lights. Just two people who'd been through enough to appreciate the slow, steady kind of connection that builds when you stop assuming the worst. A year ago, I thought. I was just a guy trying to do a small good deed that got thrown back in my face. Turns out, it was the start of one of the most unexpectedly meaningful relationships of my life. Now when people ask how Lydia and I met, I tell them, technically, it started with an insult. They always laugh, but she just grins, sips her coffee, and says, he deserved it. And honestly, maybe I did. Because if that moment hadn't happened, neither of us would have learned how good it feels to let someone surprise you. Sometimes, the worst first impression ends up being the best beginning. Stories number 6. When he asked me for $20,000, I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to make a decision like this. You hear stories online about people lending money to partners and things going bad, but you always think, that won't happen to me. I thought my boyfriend, Evan, was responsible, mature. The kind of guy who would never put me in a position like this. Evan and I have been together for 3 years. We met at a small art fair downtown. He'd come with some friends, and I was helping a local gallery set up their booth. We clicked fast. He was funny, patient, and passionate about his work. He's a mechanical engineer, and I work in marketing at a small firm. Our relationship had always felt steady, not overly dramatic, but real. We moved in together a year ago. Our finances were separate, but we shared rent and groceries evenly. Everything was transparent. I've always been careful with money. I had savings, an emergency fund, even a small investment account. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. A few months ago, Evan started acting off. He was quieter, distracted. He'd come home late, say he had work stress, and avoid details. I tried to give him space, assuming it was just a rough patch. One night, after dinner, he sat me down and said, I need to talk to you about something serious. I could tell by his tone that it wasn't going to be good. He told me he'd made a mistake. He had invested in a startup opportunity through a friend of his, some guy named Kyle from college, who was supposedly developing a renewable energy prototype, the kind of thing that sounded exciting and innovative. Evan said Kyle had convinced him to invest early, promising big returns. It wasn't just a few $100s. It was $20,000 money Evan didn't have, apparently. He'd taken out a personal loan, assuming he'd make it back fast. But the project fell apart. Kyle ghosted everyone. And now the loan company was calling. Evan looked sick when he said it out loud. He said he didn't know what to do, that he was out of options. And then came the question that made my stomach drop. Can you lend me the money? Just until I figure things out? At first, I didn't even know how to respond. He wasn't asking for $200. He wanted $20,000. I tried to stay calm. I asked if he had tried other options. Refinancing, family help, selling some assets. He said his parents couldn't afford to help, and that if his credit took another hit, he'd lose his chance to get a better job he was applying for. He said it was temporary, that he'd pay me back within a year. Part of me wanted to help him. He's my boyfriend. I care about him. But the other part of me, the rational, slightly skeptical side, was screaming, "Don't do it. I've worked since I was 16. That savings represented years of careful planning." When I hesitated, Evan looked defeated. He said, "I knew you'd think I'm a screw-up. I just didn't know who else to ask." That guilt hit hard. I told him I'd think about it. For days. It was all I could think about. I talked to my best friend, Natalie, who immediately said, "No way. Never mix money and relationships." My brother, Matt, said something similar. "If he really respects you," he told me, "he won't want you to risk your financial stability for his mistake." But Evan kept bringing it up, not in a demanding way, but in small emotional hints. He'd mention how much stress he was under, how embarrassed he felt, how he was trying to fix everything. I could tell he wanted me to offer without him having to ask again. One night, after another tense dinner, I said, "I can't lend you the money." He just stared at me. I explained that it wasn't about not trusting him, but about protecting myself, that I could maybe help him look into financial counseling or help him make a plan, but I couldn't be his bank. He didn't yell. He didn't storm out. He just looked disappointed, quiet, for a few weeks after that. Things were awkward. He was polite but distant. I started to feel like the bad guy in my own relationship. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I started asking subtle questions about Kyle and that startup. The details didn't add up. So I did something I probably shouldn't have. I searched online for the company name. Nothing came up. Then I looked up Kyle's name. Turns out, he'd been mentioned in a local news article 2 years ago for a crypto investment scheme that fell apart. My heart sank when I confronted Evan. He looked stunned. Then he admitted that he'd known. He said he wanted to believe Kyle had changed, that he'd been desperate to make extra money so he could propose to me soon, and he thought this was his shot. That part made me angry, not because of the proposal, but because it showed how little he'd thought things through. We fought, not screaming, but one of those deep, quiet fights that change everything. He said he felt humiliated. I said I felt manipulated. We didn't break up that night, but things were never the same after. He started staying late at work again, and I could tell the shame was eating at him. Eventually, about 2 months later, he told me he was moving back in with his brother to reset. I helped him pack. We hugged goodbye. It was strange. There was love still there, but it was buried under so much disappointment. It's been about 6 months now. He paid off part of the loan after selling his car and taking a second job. He sent me a text a while back saying he finally feels like he's turning things around. I told him I was glad, and I am. Looking back, I realized that moment, the night he asked me for that money, was the real test of our relationship. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it revealed. Love is not supposed to be an open checkbook. It's supposed to be partnership, trust, and accountability. I don't regret saying no. I think it saved me from losing more than just money. It's been almost a year since that whole thing with Evan happened, and I never thought I'd be writing an update. But here we are. A lot has changed, and honestly, I've done a lot of thinking about what that relationship meant to me. After Evan moved out, things felt weirdly empty. Not just the apartment, but the silence. We'd lived together for over a year, and suddenly, all that shared routine was gone. His toothbrush wasn't next to mine anymore. His sneakers weren't by the door. I'd walk into the kitchen and still expect him to be there, scrolling through his phone, pretending not to be hungry until I offered to cook. I missed him, but not in the way I expected. I didn't miss the constant tension or the weight of his mistakes. I missed who I thought he was before things went downhill. For the first few months after he left, we barely spoke. He texted once or twice to say he was doing better and had found a new apartment closer to his job. I told him I was glad and left it at that. I thought that would be the end of our story. Then, about 3 months later, he called me. It was a Sunday night, and I almost didn't answer because I thought it might stir up emotions I'd finally settled. But curiosity won. He sounded different, calmer, more grounded. He said he'd been working 2 jobs to pay off the loan and was finally making progress. He also admitted he'd started therapy. That part caught me off guard. He said it was helping him face how he handled things, and how much shame he carried about the whole situation. He apologized again, not just for asking me for money, but for how he'd handled my no. He said he realized that what I did was fair, and that at the time, he just didn't want to face the consequences of his own choices. It wasn't some big dramatic reconciliation moment, just 2 people talking. Finally, without defensiveness or guilt hanging over every word, we talked for over 2 hours that night. I hung up feeling strange, peaceful, but also nostalgic. Around that time, I'd started seeing someone new. His name's Ryan. We met at a local coffee shop where I like to work sometimes. He's a graphic designer, kind of quiet but thoughtful in a way that feels easy. When I told him about my situation with Evan, just briefly, nothing too detailed, he didn't judge, he just said, "That must have been hard," and somehow, that was exactly what I needed to hear. With Ryan, things have been different. We're careful with boundaries, we talk openly about money, values, expectations, stuff I used to tiptoe around with Evan, but the story didn't completely end there. Last month, Evan texted again. He said he'd finally paid off his entire loan. It took him over a year, but he did it. He told me he'd been promoted at work and that his therapist encouraged him to reach out to people he'd hurt in the past. Not to reconnect, but to make peace, he said. "You taught me what accountability actually looks like." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me still had that instinctive pull, the one that wanted to comfort him, to say I was proud of him. But I realized that wasn't my role anymore, so I just said, "I'm glad you're doing well. You worked hard for that." He replied with a simple, "Thank you for saying no when I didn't deserve yes." That line stuck with me. It took a long time for me to stop feeling guilty about setting that boundary. I used to wonder if I was cold for not helping him. But hearing that, I realized it probably did more for him than I ever could have imagined. Funny enough, I saw him a few weeks ago, totally by accident. I was out with Ryan at a street market downtown, and there he was, standing by a food stall, laughing with a friend. He looked healthy. Happier, he saw me too, and for a second our eyes met. He smiled, nodded, and kept walking. No drama, just quiet closure. I went home that night feeling oddly light. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of what happened between us. It was just something I'd learned from now. When I think about that moment when he asked for the money, I don't just see it as a red flag or a betrayal. It was a turning point for both of us. He had to face his choices. I had to learn to protect myself without feeling guilty for it. I still believe in helping the people you love, but I've learned that love doesn't mean saving someone from their consequences. Sometimes it means trusting them to figure it out, even if it hurts to watch. Evan figured it out, and so did I. It's been 2 years now since that whole chapter with Evan closed. And this really will be the last time I talk about it. So much has changed. And honestly, it feels like I'm looking back at a completely different version of myself. One who is still learning what self-respect actually looked like in practice. After that last quiet encounter at the street market, Evan and I never spoke again. Not in a cold way, just naturally faded. There was no anger left, no awkward tension. The story had ended, and both of us had accepted it. Every now and then, mutual friends mention he's doing well. He bought a small townhouse, still at the same company, and apparently even started volunteering with a financial literacy group that helps people manage debt. That part made me smile. If anything, he turned his mess into something useful. As for me, life feels stable in a way it never did before. I stayed with Ryan, and our relationship has grown slowly and deliberately. We moved in together last spring, after almost 2 years of dating. It was the first time I'd ever moved in with someone without that panicky voice in my head asking, "What if this goes wrong?" We took our time. We talked through every detail, how we'd split bills, what we expected from each other, what we'd do when conflicts inevitably came up, and yes, they did come up. We've had arguments about money, chores, family visits, all the normal couple things. But the difference is, we both stay present. There's no passive-aggressive silence. No guilt trips, no emotional manipulation. I learned how to speak up early instead of letting resentment build. That lesson came directly from my time with Evan back then. I used to think saying no meant being unkind. I'd overextend myself financially and emotionally just to prove I was supportive. But that kind of support doesn't actually help anyone. It just burns you out while the other person never learns. In a strange way, that whole experience forced me to grow up. It taught me that love without boundaries isn't love, it's fear. My career also took a turn for the better. I got promoted last summer at the design firm where I work, and for the first time, I make enough to live comfortably and save. I even started a small side business doing freelance work for nonprofits, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence for. The funny part? When I got that promotion, I thought of Evan, not because I missed him or wished he could see it, but because there was a time when I felt like I owed my success to other people's validation. Now I know better. I'm proud because I built this version of my life through hard lessons. Some painful, some necessary. A few months ago, I got an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize at first. It was Evan. The subject line just said, "One last thing." He told me he was getting married. Her name is Leah, and from the way he described her, she sounds lovely. Someone patient but strong-willed. He said he wanted to thank me again, that he'd finally reached a place where he didn't feel like his past defined him. He even joked that he'd learned how to budget before buying engagement rings. I didn't respond for a few days, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to think about it. Eventually, I wrote back a simple message. "I'm glad you're happy. You worked hard to get there. Wishing you both peace and love." That was it. No over-explaining, no nostalgia, just closure. Quiet and honest. After that, I deleted the thread. Not out of anger, just to let it go for good. When I told Ryan about it, he just nodded and said, "That's really mature of you." Then he reached over, took my hand and said, "You don't owe anyone your past anymore." And he was right. Sometimes I still think about that version of me who sat at our old kitchen table, listening to Evan ask for money and feeling her stomach drop. I remember how scared she was to say no, how much she doubted herself afterward. If I could talk to her now, I'd tell her that moment didn't make her cold or heartless. It made her brave. We don't always get to see the long-term effects of our hardest decisions, but sometimes they echo forward in ways we never expect. Evan became someone better, and I became someone stronger. So yeah, it all hurt back then. It was messy, confusing, and unfair. But if I had to live it again, I wouldn't change a thing, because that was the year I finally learned how to choose myself. And to this day, it's the best decision I ever made. Stories number 7. When my heart calms down. Only when she's gone, I, 31M, have been with my girlfriend, Nicole, 36F, for almost 3 years now. She's smart, successful, and on paper everything I thought I wanted. She's a marketing director at a tech startup, the kind of woman who walks into a room and instantly owns it. When we first met, I felt lucky, like I'd finally met someone out of my league who somehow wanted me back, but lately, something has been off. I've always struggled with anxiety, the kind that makes your chest tight for no reason, your hands sweaty, and your mind race at 2 a.m. I've been through therapy, tried meditation, even dabbled in medication a few years ago. Nicole has always been understanding about it, or at least I thought she was. She would say things like, "You just overthink too much," or, "You need to control your breathing more." But she never mocked me. A few weeks ago, she got a new Apple Watch and offered me her old one. She said, "Hey, this thing tracks heart rate and stress. Maybe it'll help you understand when your anxiety spikes." It sounded like a good idea. I set it up and started wearing it daily, mostly out of curiosity. For the first few days, I barely looked at the data. Then one night while lying in bed, I opened the app and noticed something odd. My heart rate was consistently lower when I was at work or out running errands, but it spiked significantly in the evenings. When I was home with Nicole, at first I thought it had to be a coincidence. Maybe caffeine, maybe stress from work carried over into the night. But I started tracking it intentionally. One evening, when Nicole went out for dinner with her coworkers, I stayed home and checked my watch throughout the night. My average heart rate was around 62 BPM, calm, steady. The next night, when we were together watching a movie, it was in the mid-90s. It didn't make sense. We weren't fighting. We weren't doing anything stressful. She was just there. Over the next week, I became obsessed with the numbers. I tracked it through every possible scenario. Driving home from work, walking into our apartment, sitting next to her on the couch. Every time my heart rate jumped. The second she left, it dropped again. I even tested it without telling her one weekend. She went to visit her sister for 2 days. I stayed home, relaxed, cooked for myself, went for a long walk, even played video games until midnight. When I checked the data that Sunday night, my resting heart rate was the lowest it had been in months. I actually laughed out loud. Laughed. Something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. But then she came back. The next morning, I woke up next to her, and before I even opened my eyes, I could feel it. That familiar tightness in my chest, the tension in my shoulders. I reached for my phone, checked the watch, and there it was again, 98 BPM, just lying still. It was like my body was trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. Nicole noticed I was distant that week. She asked, "Is something wrong?" "You've been quiet lately," I said. "Just tired." And she gave me this look, a mix of suspicion and irritation. She's the type who hates when emotions get messy. If something's wrong, she wants it fixed now. She once told me she broke up with her college boyfriend because he wasn't emotionally disciplined. The irony wasn't lost on me. That night, while she was showering, I looked over at her watch on the nightstand. The same one I'd been using. I don't know what I was expecting, but I started going through the health data again. There were patterns. Patterns I hadn't noticed before. My heart rate would spike during arguments, which made sense, but it would also climb whenever she got home from work, whenever we had dinner together, whenever she texted me things like, "We need to talk." It was almost Pavlovian. Like my body had learned that her presence meant tension. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My body literally felt unsafe around the person I was supposed to love. And it's not that she was abusive. She never yelled, never hit me, never insulted me, but she was sharp, always right, always in control. Every decision, every plan, every conversation had to orbit around her. If I disagreed, she'd sigh or roll her eyes, like I was being difficult for no reason. She'd call it standards. I'd call it suffocation. The watch became this weird mirror I couldn't look away from. It showed me, in real numbers, that I wasn't at peace in my own relationship. I tried to talk to my best friend Kyle about it. We were grabbing coffee, and I told him about the heart rate data. He laughed at first. "Man, you're really out here running a scientific study on your girlfriend?" But when I explained the consistency of the data, he stopped laughing. He said, "If your body is reacting like that every time you're with her, maybe it's trying to tell you something your mind won't." That sentence stayed with me for days. I didn't want to believe him. I kept telling myself that I was just anxious, that I was overanalyzing, that it didn't mean anything, but the watch didn't lie. And then came the breaking point. We were supposed to go to her friend's engagement party. I was already drained from work, and my anxiety had been high all day. When I told Nicole I didn't feel up for going, she said, "You can't keep hiding behind your anxiety every time something's inconvenient." That one sentence shattered something in me. I just stood there, silent, and she walked off muttering, "I swear, you make everything harder than it needs to be." That night, while she was asleep, I took the watch off and stared at it for a long time. My heart was racing again, just sitting there. I checked the reading, 104 BPM. The next morning, I packed a bag. She woke up while I was zipping it closed. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice sharp. I said, "I need space, I need to breathe." She scoffed. "You're leaving because of anxiety? Again?" I didn't answer, I just walked out. For the first time in months, I drove with the windows down, feeling the air on my face, the sun on my arm. My heart rate dropped back to 67 BPM. That number felt like freedom. It's been 2 weeks since then. I've been staying with Kyle, going to therapy again, and trying to untangle the mess in my head. Nicole texted a few times, mostly confusion turning into anger. "You're being dramatic. You need to stop running away from people who care about you." But I know now, if loving someone means your body forgets how to rest, that's not love, that's survival. And I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live, so the path forward, I don't know yet. Maybe more therapy, maybe new routines. But definitely, without question, a new heart rate baseline that doesn't depend on someone else's presence. Because if peace only exists when they're gone, that's your answer right there. So, a lot has happened since I made my original post. And honestly, I'm still kind of spinning from it all. When I first posted, I didn't really expect it to blow up. I was just venting, confused about why my heart rate literally calmed down when I wasn't around my girlfriend. Allison. Reading through the comments hit me harder than I thought. So many people talked about emotional safety, subconscious anxiety, and even how our bodies react before our minds catch up. I didn't want to believe it, that being with her might actually be stressing me out instead of comforting me. But the more I thought about it, the more things started clicking into place. For context, we've been together for almost 3 years. Allison is very type A, sharp, detail-oriented, and driven. She's also got this intensity about her that used to feel passionate. But lately it's been exhausting. Everything had to be perfect. The house, our routines, how we presented ourselves to others. Even the way I expressed myself had to be just right. I'd noticed how much I filtered what I said around her. Not because I was scared of her, but because I didn't want to deal with the sighs, the corrections, the subtle digs. After reading all those comments, I decided to actually test things again. Not to prove anyone wrong, but just to see. I wore the Apple Watch for another week, tracking my heart rate around her versus when I was alone or hanging out with my best friend Brandon, and yeah, the numbers didn't lie. When I was with her, My resting heart rate was anywhere from 95 to 105 BPM. When I was home alone reading, it dropped to the low 70s. When I was at Brandon's house, joking around, it even hit the 60s. But here's the thing. It wasn't just the numbers. I started noticing the physical difference too. Around her, my shoulders would tense up. I'd find myself holding my breath without realizing it. So I decided to talk to her. I told her what I found, how my anxiety seemed to spike when we were together, and that I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I just wanted to understand why. She laughed, actually laughed. She said, "So now your watch is telling you you're unhappy with me? That's cute." Then she went on this whole rant about how I always look for problems instead of appreciating what I have. I tried to stay calm, but she kept pushing, saying I was being dramatic, that no one else would put up with my sensitivity. That broke me, because the more she said it, the more I realized that's exactly the dynamic I'd been living in. Being told I was overreacting, being too emotional, being lucky she loved me enough to deal with it. I didn't say much that night. I just told her I needed space. I packed a small bag and went to stay with Brandon for a while. And you know what? Within a few days, the difference was insane. I was sleeping better, eating better. My heart rate stabilized, my anxiety dropped. I could actually breathe. It was like stepping out of fog and realizing how heavy it had been all along. Allison texted me a few times, mostly annoyed that I'd left. She said I was being childish and that a watch doesn't determine love. And she's right. It doesn't, but it sure as hell reflects something real. A week later, she called and said she was willing to work on it, but then started listing my flaws first, how I don't handle pressure well, and how she needs someone stronger. That was the moment I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I told her I wasn't coming back. She hung up on me, and honestly, I felt relief. A strange, quiet kind of relief that filled the space she used to occupy. It's been about 3 weeks since that call. I'm still processing everything. Therapy has helped a lot. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Your body knew before your brain could admit it, and that's exactly what it felt like. My heart was literally trying to tell me something. That I wasn't safe emotionally, even if I thought I was. So yeah, I'm single now. It's weird, but peaceful. The Apple Watch thing turned out to be a wake-up call. Not about fitness or data, but about how your body keeps score of what your mind tries to ignore. If there's anything I learned from this, it's that real love shouldn't make you tense up. It shouldn't make your body panic when the person walks into the room. Love should make you feel grounded, like you can exhale, and I finally can. It's been about 2 months since my last post, and I honestly didn't expect to have any kind of final update. I figured things were done between me and Allison, and that was that. But life has a funny way of making you revisit the very things you thought you'd left behind. After the breakup, I focused on myself. Therapy became a consistent thing instead of a last resort. I got back into running again, picked up weekend hikes, and even joined a small anxiety support group that meets on Thursdays at a coffee shop downtown. It was the first time in a long time that I was building my life around peace, not performance. I also stopped wearing the Apple Watch for a bit. I wanted to learn how to listen to my body without needing a notification to tell me how I felt. But I started wearing it again a few weeks later, and this time it felt different. Like it was a tool, not a warning sign. Then one night I ran into Allison. It wasn't planned. I was out with Brandon and his girlfriend at a rooftop bar, and there she was. Same sharp posture, same confidence, but something in her looked tired. We made eye contact, and she gave me a small wave. I hesitated but walked over. The conversation started polite enough. She asked how I was doing, said she'd been thinking about me. I could tell she was trying to keep it light, but there was this undercurrent of guilt or something like it. After a few minutes, she said quietly, "You were right." That threw me. She told me she'd started therapy after our breakup. Her therapist apparently pointed out some patterns. Control issues, emotional invalidation, that kind of thing. She said she hadn't realized how much pressure she put on people to match her standards. And for the first time, she didn't sound defensive. She apologized. Not with excuses or half measures, but a genuine apology. She said she loved me, but didn't know how to love someone who needed softness instead of structure. I won't lie. Hearing that made something in me ache, because despite everything, I did love her once. I missed the good moments, the ones where she'd fall asleep on my shoulder during movies, or the way she'd hum while cooking. But I also remembered the nights my chest felt like it was in a vice, the constant second-guessing, the exhaustion of always trying to be good enough. so I told her I forgave her, but that I couldn't go back. She nodded, and we just stood there for a moment, both quiet, both knowing this was closure, not rekindling. She said she hoped I found someone who felt like calm instead of chaos. That line stuck with me. After she left, I sat there for a while just breathing, really breathing, and realizing how far I'd come. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt for choosing myself. I didn't feel like the villain for walking away from something that hurt me, even if it looked fine from the outside. The next morning, I looked at my Apple Watch again. My resting heart rate had dropped even lower. Steady 64 BPM. It sounds silly, but I smiled at that number, because it wasn't about Allison anymore. It was about me finally being in tune with myself. Therapy helped me unpack a lot of things. How growing up, I equated love with effort. How I thought if something didn't feel hard, it must not be real. Turns out, love doesn't have to be anxiety disguised as passion. It can be quiet, simple. I started seeing someone new recently. Her name's Julia. We met at the support group, of all places. She's patient and kind. The kind of person who asks how your day was and actually listens. It's early, and I'm not rushing it. But here's the thing. When I'm with her, my heart rate stays steady, not because she's perfect, but because I don't have to brace myself for love. That's something I never thought I'd find again, so if you've ever had your body tell you something your mind didn't want to admit, pay attention. Sometimes anxiety isn't random. Sometimes it's your body whispering, "This isn't safety." I learned that the hard way, but I'm grateful I did. Because now, for the first time in years, I don't need an Apple Watch to tell me I'm okay. I just know, and that's peace I never thought I'd earn. Stories number 8. I let my kids order full meals instead of from the kids' menu. And now my in-laws think I'm raising spoiled brats. We went out to dinner last weekend for my father-in-law's birthday. A big family dinner at this mid-range steakhouse that's nice enough to have cloth napkins, but not so fancy that you feel like you need to whisper. My husband and I have 3 kids, Eli, 11, Maya, 9, and Toby, 7. And for the past year or so, we've stopped ordering from the kids' menu for them. It started during one of our rare takeout nights when Eli pointed out that the kids' cheeseburger was literally the same size as the adult one, but with fewer fries and no toppings, and it cost $9 while the adult burger was $13. I thought, yeah, that's ridiculous. The portions weren't even enough for them anymore, especially Eli, who's in that bottomless pit stage of preteen hunger where he eats, blinks, and then asks for more. So we started just letting them order what they actually wanted. Sometimes they finish it, sometimes they take leftovers home. It's not about indulgence. It's about not forcing them to eat off a cutesy kids menu that offers the same 3 options: mac and cheese, chicken tenders, or buttered noodles. Anyway, at the restaurant, everyone was ordering, and when it got to our turn, Eli ordered the salmon with mashed potatoes, Maya wanted the pasta primavera, and Toby asked for the grilled chicken with rice. They all said please and thank you. They drink water. They know how to sit still and they don't make a mess. Honestly, they're better behaved at restaurants than some adults I've seen. The waitress smiled and took their orders without blinking. But I noticed my mother-in-law, Linda, stiffen across the table. She leaned over to my husband, Mark, and said something under her breath. I couldn't hear it, but he gave her that tight, "Please don't start" look. When the food came, everything was great, until the check arrived. My father-in-law, George, picked it up and immediately joked, "Well, I guess I'm feeding a small army tonight," he was laughing. But Linda jumped right in with, "That's because some people think kids need adult-sized meals now." The whole table went silent. I tried to diffuse it with a smile and said, "They're growing fast. The kids' menu just doesn't cut it anymore." Linda crossed her arms and said, "They're kids. They don't need to eat like grown-ups. You're teaching them to be entitled." At this point, Mark stepped in and said, "Mom, it's fine. We can split the bill if it's a problem." But Linda wasn't letting it go. "It's not about the money," she said, which of course meant it was about the money. "It's about principle. When we were raising you, Mark, we taught you to be humble. You didn't demand adult meals when you were 10 years old," I wanted to say. "Yeah, and you probably walked uphill both ways to school too." But I bit my tongue. Eli looked embarrassed. Maya was poking at her pasta, and Toby whispered, "Did we do something wrong?" That broke my heart. I told him no, of course not, and tried to redirect the conversation. But Linda was simmering the rest of dinner, muttering little things like, "Some parents just can't say no," or "Kids these days don't know what limits are." When we got home, Mark apologized for his mom. saying she's just old school and doesn't understand that things are different now. But honestly, it got under my skin. First, my kids didn't demand anything. They asked politely and were grateful for their food. Second, if we can afford it. And we can. Why does it matter what they order? It's not like we're teaching them to expect luxury. We just want them to eat decent food. What really bugged me was the entitlement accusation. Because my kids aren't like that. They help with chores, they know the value of money, and when we eat out, it's maybe once or twice a month, tops. Letting them order what they want feels like a small thing in a world where so many people try to control kids for the sake of teaching lessons. The next day, Linda texted me saying she'd been disappointed by how disrespectful I was to her at dinner. She said I embarrassed her by allowing the children to behave like adults. That phrase made my blood boil. I didn't respond right away, but later I wrote back, they weren't behaving like adults. They were behaving like polite, thoughtful kids. That's the goal, right? She didn't reply. A few days later, Mark told me Linda called him crying, saying she just wants to be included in the kids' upbringing, and that she feels like we don't value her traditions. He asked if I could apologize. Just to smooth things over, I said. Apologize for what? For letting our kids eat salmon instead of chicken nuggets? He sighed and said, it's not about the food. It's about control. He's probably right. Linda has always been a bit of a matriarch. The kind of person who insists she knows what's best for everyone. And to her, kids being humble means they should be small, quiet, and grateful for whatever's given to them. But I don't want my kids to shrink themselves just to make someone else comfortable. The funny thing is, a week later, we took the kids to a different restaurant. And when the waitress handed us kids' menus, Toby actually said, no thank you. I'd like the grilled chicken from the regular menu. Please. The waitress smiled, said, you got it, buddy, and didn't even blink. They all finished their meals, didn't waste a bite, and left a note on the napkin that said, thank you for being nice. And I thought, yeah, these are the manners that matter. Linda still hasn't spoken to me since the dinner, apparently. She told Mark that I'm raising mini adults instead of children. Maybe she meant it as an insult. But honestly, I'll take that as a compliment, because if my kids grow up knowing how to order respectfully, eat mindfully, and not settle for less just because someone says they should, then maybe that's exactly the kind of adult I want them to become. About 3 weeks passed after that dinner, and things were still pretty tense with Linda. She hadn't texted me again, and every time she called Mark, he'd walk into another room to talk. I wasn't eavesdropping, but it doesn't take a genius to read the signs. The heavy sigh before answering, the raised voice fading down the hallway, the slow exhale when he came back like he'd just survived a storm. Mark's birthday was coming up, and I knew that would force another family gathering. Linda never misses a chance to host a birthday, especially for her firstborn. She's one of those people who turns birthdays into performances. Themed decorations, matching napkins, a cake that says something passive-aggressive like, Happy 39th, you're still my baby. When the invitation came through, a group text with her usual cheerful punctuation overkill. Emily dinner for Mark. Sunday 6 p.m. bring the kids. I knew we couldn't avoid it. I told Mark, if she starts anything, I'm not engaging. I'll just leave. He nodded, said, I'll handle it this time. So Sunday rolls around. The kids were excited. They love seeing their cousins and playing in the backyard at their grandparents' house. We got there right on time, and for a few minutes, everything was surprisingly normal. Linda greeted the kids warmly, gave Mark a big hug, and even smiled at me. I thought, maybe this will actually be fine. Dinner smelled incredible. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. The kids were helping set the table when Linda said, I made sure to serve everyone equal portions tonight. She said it casually, but her tone had that thin edge, the kind that slices before you realize you're bleeding. I caught Mark's eyes across the table, and he gave me the tiniest shake of his head, silently pleading, don't take the bait. Dinner went smoothly at first. The conversation hovered safely around work, school, and the upcoming holidays. Eli told everyone about his science fair project, and Toby made everyone laugh by announcing that mashed potatoes were just butter pretending to be healthy. Then, after dessert, Linda leaned back in her chair and said, I've been thinking a lot about our last dinner together. I froze. She continued, and I realized that maybe I came off a little harsh. I just worry, you know? Kids these days are growing up too fast. When I was a girl, We were happy just to have hot dogs and Jell-O. We didn't need salmon to feel special. I took a deep breath. I understand where you're coming from, I said. But I think times are different now. I don't want the kids to feel like enjoying something nice means they're spoiled. Linda sighed dramatically, like she was accepting a great burden. Maybe, I suppose I just want them to appreciate what they have. They do, I said gently. You should see them at home. They save leftovers. They help clean up. They thank the servers when we go out. They're learning gratitude. She looked at me for a long moment, then turned to Eli and asked, Do you always say thank you, sweetie? Eli blinked, a little nervous but honest. Yes, ma'am. Even if the food's bad. That actually made her laugh. A real genuine laugh. Well, that's something at least, she said. I thought maybe that was the end of it, but later. While Mark was helping his dad clean up, Linda pulled me aside in the kitchen. I know I was unfair, she said quietly. It's hard for me sometimes to see how fast everything's changing. You're doing things differently than I did. And I guess I took that as an insult instead of just change. It took me a second to respond because I wasn't expecting humility from her. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I really do, she nodded, then added, For what it's worth, the kids are lovely. I can tell they have good manners. You're doing a good job. It felt like a peace offering, not a perfect one. But real enough, later that night, as we were leaving, Linda handed each of the kids a little envelope with a $10 bill inside. For your next fancy meal, she teased. But this time she was smiling on the drive home. Mark reached over and squeezed my hand. That went better than expected, he said. Yeah, I said. But I'm still never ordering off the kids' menu again. He laughed. Deal. And just when I thought that was the end of it, something kind of sweet happened the following weekend. We went to lunch with the kids. Just a casual burger place. And when the waitress came around, she asked Toby if he wanted a kid's cheeseburger. He smiled and said, No thank you, but my grandma says I have good manners. So can I please have the grilled chicken sandwich instead? I nearly burst out laughing. The waitress grinned, said, Of course you can. Polite young man, and in that moment, I realized something. All the drama, all the tension, all the defensiveness. It all boiled down to one simple thing. Linda wanted to feel like she was still part of how we were raising our kids. And maybe, in her own old-fashioned way, she was trying to pass something down. Even if it came out sideways. She might never fully understand why I do things the way I do, but at least now we're both trying to meet in the middle. And for the first time in a while, dinner doesn't feel like a battleground. It feels like family again. Slightly awkward, slightly loud, but still ours. It's been almost 6 months since that dinner at Linda and George's house. And it's funny how much can shift in that kind of time. I didn't realize it then, but that awkward, tension-filled meal actually marked a turning point. Not just for Linda and me, but for the whole dynamic of our family. After that night, something softened in her. She didn't start texting me daily or anything, thank God, but she began including me more intentionally in things. Small stuff at first. Asking what the kids might like for Christmas, instead of just buying whatever she thought was appropriate. Sending me a recipe for a healthy mac and cheese, and joking that maybe this one would pass my approval. Little gestures like that. It was her way of extending an olive branch without actually saying, I'm sorry again, but the real test came around spring break. Mark's brother Tom and his wife Rachel had invited the whole family for a mini beach trip. It was the first time all of us, grandparents, siblings, cousins, would be spending a weekend together since before the pandemic, to be totally honest. I wasn't thrilled at the idea of being trapped in a rental house with Linda for 3 days, but Mark wanted to go, and the kids were over the moon about it. So I agreed. We drove down to the coast, and to my surprise it was actually nice. The house was big enough that everyone had space. The weather was perfect. The kids ran wild with their cousins collecting shells and building sandcastles. Even Linda seemed more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. She wore flip-flops, for crying out loud. The first night, we all went out to dinner at a seafood place by the pier. It was one of those loud, chaotic restaurants with paper tablecloths and crayons for the kids. And I braced myself when the waitress brought out the menus. Sure enough, she handed the kids the bright-colored under-12 menu, with cartoon dolphins on it. Before I could say anything, Maya politely handed hers back and said, Thank you, but I'd like the grilled shrimp. Please, the waitress smiled and nodded. Eli ordered the same thing, and Toby asked for the pasta with clam sauce. Linda watched the whole exchange silently. Sipping her iced tea, when the food arrived, Toby took one bite, looked at his plate thoughtfully and said, "This is so good, Grandma." "You'd like it?" Linda blinked, a little startled, and said, "Oh, really?" He nodded earnestly. "You said we should always share, right? Want to try some?" And he held out a forkful. It was such a simple moment, but I swear you could feel the air shift around the table. Linda smiled, not her tight, polite smile, but a real one that reached her eyes, and said, "Why not?" She took a bite and laughed softly. "That's actually really good. You've got good taste, kiddo." After that, dinner turned into this genuinely warm, funny, chaotic family moment. Nobody bickered about prices or portions. The kids were respectful. The adults were relaxed. And when the bill came, Linda even made a little joke. "Well, looks like my grandchildren have champagne taste on a lemonade budget." But this time, it wasn't sharp, it was affectionate. Later that night, when we were all back at the beach house, Linda came out onto the porch where I was sitting with a glass of wine, watching the kids chase fireflies. She sat down next to me and was quiet for a bit before saying, "You know, I think I get it now." I glanced at her. "Curious about the kids," she said. "About why you let them order like that. I used to think it was about spoiling them, but it's really about teaching them confidence, isn't it?" I nodded. "Exactly. I don't want them to grow up thinking they need permission to ask for what they want, or that they have to settle for less to make someone else happy." She smiled faintly. "You're a good mom. I should have said that sooner." That caught me off guard. For years, I'd been waiting to hear anything like that from her. I felt this weird lump in my throat, and all I could manage was, "Thanks. That means a lot," she sighed, looking out toward the ocean. "I guess when you raise kids, you get used to doing things one way, and it's hard to see someone else do it differently, especially when they're doing it better." I laughed a little at that, and she smiled. We sat there for a long while, listening to the waves, until she finally said, "Next time we all go out to dinner, the grandkids can order whatever they want, as long as I get a bite." "Deal," I said. And true to her word, a few weeks later, when we all went out again for George's birthday, she didn't flinch when the kids ordered off the adult menu. In fact, she leaned over to the waitress and said, "Make sure they get dessert too. They're growing kids." Now she brags to her friends about how cultured her grandkids are, how they love seafood and salads instead of chicken fingers. She still slips in a humble brag or two. I told their mom I started them on good manners early. But I can live with that. The thing that surprised me the most, though, was how much calmer everything became afterward. Mark stopped feeling caught in the middle. The kids don't dread dinners with Grandma anymore. And I stopped bracing myself for judgment every time we sit down in a restaurant. Last week, when Toby's class had a field trip to a local museum, the teacher told me he was the only one who said thank you to the cafeteria workers, and asked if he could take his trash to the bin himself. When I told Linda that, she actually teared up and said, "He's turning out so well. You're doing something right." It's funny, that whole silly argument about kids' menus feels like a lifetime ago. Back then, I thought Linda's issue was control or pride. Maybe it was. But now I think it was more about her fear of being left behind. That the world was changing faster than she could keep up. And in a weird way, those dinners helped bridge that gap. She learned that letting go doesn't mean losing her place in the family. And I learned that sometimes patience really is the louder answer. The other night, Eli was helping me set the table, and he asked, "Mom, are we ever going to have a dinner where Grandma gets mad again?" I laughed. "I hope not." He grinned. "Good. I like her better when she's happy." I looked at him. Almost 12 now, taller, a little wiser, and thought about how something as small as ordering dinner had once caused such a storm. Now it feels like proof of how much we've all grown, and maybe that's the real story here. Not about meals or menus or even manners, but about how families, no matter how stubborn or messy, eventually learn how to sit at the same table again. Stories number 9, they gave me birthday money, and now everyone says I should spend it on my stepsister. I just turned 17 a few weeks ago, and I thought the weirdest part about having a blended family would be sharing bathrooms or getting used to new holiday traditions. Turns out it's people's expectations that really mess you up. A bit of context. My parents divorced when I was 9. My dad remarried a few years later, and he and his wife Denise live a few towns over. My mom got remarried about a year ago to a guy named Greg, who has a daughter, Emma, who's 15. Emma's fine. She's a bit quiet, spends a lot of time in her room drawing, and she's polite enough. We don't fight, but we're not close either. I wouldn't call her my sister. More like a roommate I happen to see at family dinners. A few weeks ago, my paternal grandparents, Dad's parents, sent me a birthday card with a check for $400. They've done it every year since I was little. They're retired and comfortable, and it's their way of spoiling their only biological grandkid. They always write, "Spend it on something just for you." I was thrilled. I've been saving for a new camera lens for months, and this money put me right over the edge to finally get it. I'm into photography. I shoot for my school's yearbook, and I've even made a few bucks doing portraits for seniors. It's something I love and might even study in college. When the card came in the mail, Mom and Greg were in the kitchen. I opened it right there, and Mom smiled and said, "Oh, that's sweet of them." But Greg made this weird face and said, "Wow, that's generous. Did they send anything for Emma?" I said no, because obviously they didn't. They don't know Emma. She's not their grandchild. That's when the atmosphere changed. Mom shifted awkwardly, and Greg looked kind of annoyed. He muttered something like, "Well, I hope you're not planning to spend all that on yourself when your stepsister's birthday is next week." At first, I laughed because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He said it would be nice if I used a portion of the money to buy Emma a birthday present. Since family takes care of family, I said, I already got her something, a gift card and a sketchbook. It's not like I forgot, but Greg said that wasn't really thoughtful, and that since my grandparents were showing me generosity, I should pass it on. Mom stayed quiet during all of this. She just kept washing dishes. That silence told me everything. Later that night, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. Greg said something like, "You can't let her hoard money like that. It sends the wrong message." Mom said, "It's her grandparents' gift, not ours to control." Then Greg said, "If they're going to exclude Emma, maybe we need to reevaluate what kind of values we're teaching." I felt sick. It's not like I asked my grandparents to ignore Emma. They've never even met her. For the rest of the week, Greg was cold toward me. Polite, but distant. Emma didn't mention it, though I could tell she felt awkward too. She even apologized one night and said, "You don't have to get me anything, I don't expect that. She's a good kid. This isn't about her." On Emma's birthday, I gave her the gift card and sketchbook, and she genuinely smiled. She said, "This is perfect, thank you." Greg didn't say anything, but he shot me this disappointed look that ruined the moment. That night, Mom came into my room and sat on my bed. She told me she understood my side but said Greg has a point. She said families are about sharing, and sometimes that means giving even when it's not required. I asked her point blank if she thought I should have spent the money on Emma. She said, "No, but it would have been nice." That "would have been nice" really stung. It made it sound like I was selfish for not reading her mind and doing something that wasn't even reasonable. I tried explaining that my grandparents gave me that money specifically for me. It wasn't about being greedy. It was about finally being able to buy something I've worked toward. Mom said she understood, but Greg's attitude didn't change. He still makes little comments like, "Must be nice having money to burn," or "Guess I know who to hit up when I need a new golf club." It's petty, but it's made the house uncomfortable. Last week, I finally bought the lens. I saved up, added the money, and ordered it online. When the package came, Greg saw it on the counter and said, "So that's where the family generosity went." I almost snapped, but I didn't. I just took it to my room. Emma later came by and told me not to worry about him, that she knew it wasn't fair. She even asked if she could help me test the lens. That actually made me tear up a little. The thing is, I don't know what I could have done differently. If I'd used part of that money on Emma, it would have felt forced, like I was trying to buy peace, and I know my grandparents would have been upset if they knew I didn't use it for myself. But the longer this goes on, the more it feels like Greg is waiting for me to apologize for something I didn't do wrong. I didn't ask to be part of this weird moral lesson. I just wanted to celebrate my birthday and finally enjoy something I'd earned. Now I'm counting down the days until I graduate and move out. Not because I hate anyone, but because I'm exhausted by always being the one expected to set the example, while no one else is expected to see my side. A few weeks have passed since all of that, and honestly, things haven't exactly gone back to normal. The camera lens drama somehow turned into this quiet family tension that nobody wants to name. But everyone feels. I didn't think something so small could change how the whole house feels. But here we are, after I bought the lens. Greg basically stopped trying to talk to me unless it's about chores or dinner plans. He doesn't yell or anything, he just acts disappointed, like he's waiting for me to do the right thing. Whatever that means, it's worse than being yelled at, honestly. At least yelling gives you something to push back against. This just feels heavy. Mom's caught in the middle. I can tell she wants to keep the peace. She's been extra nice lately, asking about school, offering to make my favorite dinners, asking if I want to go shopping together sometime. It's her way of apologizing without actually saying sorry. But the thing is, I don't want her to feel bad. I just wish she'd be firmer with Greg. Emma, though. She's the only one who's acted normal. Actually, better than normal. We've been hanging out more since that night she asked to help me test the lens. I taught her how to frame shots and play with light, and she showed me some of her drawings. She's really good. Like, seriously talented. We even went to the park one afternoon and did this little collab, where I took photos of her sketching landscapes. It was the first time I'd had fun in weeks when we got home that day. Greg saw us looking at the pictures on my laptop and said something like, "Oh, so that's why you needed such an expensive camera lens." It wasn't the words themselves, but the tone, sharp and sarcastic. Emma got quiet, and I could tell she felt guilty just for being there. Later that night, she came into my room again, kind of hesitant, and said, "I think my dad's just jealous that you have people who do stuff for you." That threw me off. I asked what she meant, and she said, "My dad's parents never really did that for me. He's always felt like his side of the family had to fight for everything while your dad's side just gives." That made me think about things differently. Maybe Greg isn't mad about the money itself. Maybe it's about what it represents. Still, I don't think it's fair to take it out on me. A few days after that, my grandparents called to check in. Grandma asked if I'd gotten anything fun with their gift, and I told her about the lens. She was so happy. Said she wanted to see my photos next time they visit. Then she asked, in that gentle, curious way grandmas do, "How's your mom's new husband? Have we met him yet?" I hesitated, but I just said, "He's okay." That night, I guess my grandparents posted something on Facebook. A photo of me holding my camera with a caption like, "Our talented grandson following his dreams." It was sweet, except Greg saw it. He made another comment, this time in front of everyone at dinner. "Guess the rest of us don't exist in that world," he said. Mom tried to change the subject, but I could feel her fuming. Later, they fought again. I didn't hear every word, but I caught parts of it. Greg saying, "It's always about her kid. Always." That's when it really hit me. It's not about the $400, or even about Emma. It's about him feeling like an outsider in his own house. But it still sucks that I'm the punching bag for it. Now, I mostly stay out of the house when I can. I go on photo walks, hang out with my friend Dylan, or just drive around. I got accepted into a summer photography program at a local community college. And when I told Mom, she cried. She said she was proud of me, but she also said, "Please don't let this thing with Greg make you hate being home." I don't hate home, I just feel like it's not really mine anymore. Emma told me last night that Greg's been talking about family budgets and how gifts from outside relatives should be handled responsibly. That made my blood boil, because it sounds like he's trying to find a way to control any future money that comes my way. I told Mom straight up that if he tries to touch anything my grandparents send, I'll refuse it. She looked heartbroken, but she said she understood. The weirdest part is that through all this, Emma and I have actually grown closer. We've started talking about doing a joint art project, a photo and sketchbook series about family dynamics, which, yeah, is kind of ironic. So I guess something good came out of all this, but it still feels like I'm living under a microscope. Every time Greg looks at me, it's like he's waiting for proof that I'm selfish or spoiled. And maybe I am spoiled in some ways. I get that. But I also know I've worked for everything I have. I've earned it. I just wish he could see that too. If things keep going like this, I'm definitely moving out as soon as I graduate. I'll miss my mom and Emma, but I can't keep living in a house where someone's resentment is hanging in the air like a fog. Until then, I'm keeping my head down, saving my money and taking as many photos as I can. It's the one thing that still feels like mine. It's been about 6 months since everything went down, and I think I can finally say things have settled, though not in the way I thought they would. After my last post, the tension in the house got so thick that every small thing felt like it could spark a fight. Greg and my mom barely spoke unless it was about bills or groceries. I tried to stay invisible, focusing on school and photography, but that only made Greg more bitter. He'd make little comments under his breath about kids these days, or how some people just get everything handed to them. I ignored it at first, but it started to wear me down. The breaking point came one night in July. I'd been saving up for a new camera body to go with the lens my grandparents helped me get. I'd been doing small photo gigs, graduation shoots, engagement sessions, that kind of thing, and I finally had enough to buy it used. I told Mom about it, and she was excited. She even said she'd drive me to the seller's place. Greg overheard and said, "You're buying another camera? Didn't your grandparents already get you one?" I said, "No, they got me a lens. I've been saving up for this for months." He just scoffed and said, "Must be nice to throw money around when some people are trying to keep the lights on." That stung, especially because I've been paying for my own gas, food when I'm out, and anything extra for school. I told him that, and he just snapped, "You don't know what real responsibility looks like." It turned into a full-blown argument. I don't even remember half of what I said, but I do remember yelling, "You've been jealous of a 17-year-old since the day you moved in." That did it. He walked out of the room, slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall, and didn't come back for hours. Mom cried that night, not because of what I said, but because she said she'd seen this coming. She told me Greg had always struggled with insecurity, and that he felt like she sided with me every time something came up. I told her that I didn't want her to have to choose, but that I couldn't keep living under his resentment. A few days later, I stayed at my grandparents' for the weekend. They didn't ask many questions, just gave me space. My grandpa took me fishing, and Grandma made me breakfast like when I was a kid. That's when I realized how peaceful life could actually be. When I got back home, Greg was gone. Mom said he'd gone to stay with a friend to think. I didn't ask questions. He was gone for nearly 3 weeks during that time. Mom and I actually got along better than we had in years. We cooked dinner together, watched movies, even laughed. Emma still split time between both houses, but she came by often, and we'd keep doing our art stuff. She told me that her dad was having a hard time processing everything. But honestly, I didn't feel guilty. When Greg finally came back, he seemed different, not nicer exactly, but quieter. He didn't bring up the camera thing again. He barely talked to me at all, which was honestly fine by me. But a few weeks later, he asked if we could have a family dinner. Him, Mom, me, and Emma. He apologized, like an actual full apology. He said he'd been unfair, that he let his frustrations about money and life spill onto me. He admitted he was jealous of the relationship I had with my grandparents, and that it made him feel less like a real father figure. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to forgive him right away, but hearing him acknowledge it made something in me relax. I told him I appreciated the apology, and that I just wanted peace. Since then, things have been better, or at least more civil. Greg still isn't warm, but he's stopped the passive-aggressive stuff. Mom seems happier too. I think they've been in counseling, which probably helps. Emma and I are still close. We actually finished that joint art project we started, a photo and sketchbook series called In Between Homes. We submitted it to a local art contest, and we won second place. It was honestly the proudest I've ever been of anything. I'm heading off to college soon, studying photography and media. I got a partial scholarship, and my grandparents offered to help with the rest. Greg didn't say much when he found out, but he did tell me, "Congrats, you earned it." That meant more than I expected before I leave. Mom keeps saying she hopes I'll come home often, that things will be calmer when I visit. I told her I will, mostly for her and Emma. Greg and I might never be close, but I think we've at least reached a kind of uneasy understanding. Sometimes, when I look back on all of this, I realize it wasn't just about money or gifts or even jealousy. It was about family. The messy, complicated kind that doesn't fit together perfectly, but still tries. And for what it's worth, I still have that lens. Every time I pick up my camera, I remember everything that happened. And weirdly, I don't feel angry anymore, just grateful that I didn't let someone else's bitterness stop me from chasing what I love. Stories number 10, the house that wasn't ours anymore. I never thought an old house could stir this much emotion. It wasn't even mine to begin with. It belonged to my wife's grandmother. A little two-story colonial sitting at the edge of a sleepy New England town. White shutters, creaky floors, and the kind of porch that seemed made for iced tea and gossip. For years it was the family house, the one where birthdays, Thanksgivings, and awkward reunions happened. When her grandmother Martha passed away last year, my wife Nicole was devastated. She'd basically grown up there after her mom left when she was 8. Martha had raised her, fed her, and taught her everything from baking pies to fixing a leaky faucet. So when the will came through, and Nicole found out she was listed as part owner of the house, along with her aunt and 2 cousins, it was the one bit of light in her grief. The problem was, it was only 25% ownership. Her Aunt Linda got 50%, and the cousins, Chris and Megan, each got 12.5%. The will was straightforward, but that didn't make it easy. Linda lived in Florida now. Chris was always too busy, and Megan cared more about appearances than family, for months. Nicole tried to figure out a way to keep the house in the family. She'd talk about refinancing our mortgage, maybe buying out her aunt's share, even if it meant we'd be broke for a while. But every time she brought it up, Linda deflected. "We'll talk about it later," she'd say. Or, "Let's just give it a little time before we make any decisions." Fast forward to last Tuesday. Nicole gets an email from some law office she doesn't recognize. It's marked urgent. She opens it and turns pale. The subject line reads, "Notice of property sale. Scheduled for Friday. 10 a.m., 3 days." That's all the notice she got, apparently. Linda had been quietly working with a realtor for months. She'd already signed off, and because she held the majority ownership, all she needed was one of the cousins to agree to sell. And Megan, of course, had done just that. The kicker? Nicole's name was still on the deed, but no one had told her the sale was finalized. She sat there staring at the screen, her hands shaking. "They can't just do this, can they?" she asked. I didn't know what to say. Legally, I wasn't sure. Morally, it was garbage. We called the law office. And sure enough, the paperwork was already signed. The sale was set, pending transfer. Unless Nicole could come up with a serious amount of money in 72 hours, which we absolutely couldn't, the deal would go through. I don't think I've ever seen her cry like that before. Not when her grandmother died, not even when her mom skipped our wedding. She looked like someone had just stolen a piece of her life. That night she drove out to the house. She didn't even tell me at first. I just saw her keys missing and knew where she'd gone. When I got there, she was sitting on the porch swing, just staring at the windows. "This house was the only place I ever felt safe," she said. "Now they're selling it like it's just another piece of property." The wind was cold, but she didn't seem to notice. She started telling me stories about when she was little. How Martha would wake her up at dawn to pick blueberries behind the barn. How she'd sneak out to the porch to listen to the crickets at night. She talked about the smell of the kitchen, the feel of the worn banister, the way her grandmother would laugh with her whole body. It broke me to hear her like that. The next day, she tried to call Linda again. No answer. Tried texting Megan. "Sorry, Nick." "But Aunt Linda said we all agreed it was for the best," Megan replied. "For the best," Nicole repeated. Reading the message out loud, for who? Thursday came, and we drove back out there again, this time. Nicole brought a box and started packing a few things that had sentimental value. Some framed photos, an old quilt, a tin box of recipes that belonged to Martha. She wasn't even sure if she was allowed to take them, but she didn't care. At one point, she went upstairs to what used to be her room. The walls were still faintly lavender, and the same crooked mirror hung on the closet door. She stood there for a while, then said, "I thought someday we'd bring our kids here." I didn't have an answer. When Friday morning came, she didn't want to go to the closing, but I convinced her to. She said she didn't want them to see her cry. I told her she didn't have to hide it. At the attorney's office, Linda showed up with a fresh tan and a big smile, acting like this was some kind of reunion. "Nicole, it's been so long, sweetheart," she said. Leaning in for a hug that Nicole didn't return, Nicole looked at her and said, "You sold my home behind my back." Linda's face fell for a second, but she quickly recovered. "It's just a house, honey. You've got your own place now. The taxes were too much, and nobody was living there. It's not personal." Nicole didn't say another word after that. She just sat there, signing what she had to. Her eyes red but dry. When it was over, she walked out of that office without looking back. We drove home in silence. That night, I found her sitting on the porch again. Holding Martha's recipe box, she opened it, pulled out one of the index cards, and said softly, "Blueberry pie." Then she smiled through tears and said, "You know what? I'm gonna make it tomorrow. In our kitchen. That's when I realized something. Yeah, they sold the house, but they couldn't sell the home that lived in her memories. Still, watching her lose that piece of her past broke something in both of us. It wasn't about the property or the money. It was about betrayal. About family who treated heritage like a transaction. We decided that weekend we'd start saving, not to buy that house, but to buy our own one. One we could fill with the same kind of warmth and history Martha gave to hers. Nicole said, "I don't want to live in the past anymore, but I do want to build something that would make Grandma proud." And that's exactly what we're trying to do now. Still, sometimes, when we drive past that little New England town, she goes quiet for a moment, and I know she's thinking about that porch swing, the lavender walls, and the laughter that used to fill those rooms. Then she squeezes my hand, looks forward again, and says, "Let's go home. It's been about 3 months since the house was sold, and honestly, it still stings. Nicole and I have been trying to focus on building our own home, but sometimes the memories creep in at the most unexpected times. Last week, she got a call from the new owners, an older couple named Frank and Diane. They were polite but firm, apparently. They were moving in sooner than expected, and wanted to make sure the property was cleaned out. Nicole was polite but skeptical. She wasn't about to let anyone tell her what belonged to her family. When I got home from work, Nicole was pacing in the kitchen, still holding Martha's old recipe box. Her phone was on speaker, and I could hear the couple's friendly chatter about inspections, keys, and utilities. But then Nicole's voice cracked. "I understand," she said, "but these items are personal. They were my grandmother's. They belong to me." The couple paused. Then Diane said, "We're not trying to take anything that isn't yours. We just wanted to be sure the house is ready to move in." Nicole exhaled slowly and told them she'd bring the items over within a day. She hung up and turned to me, her face pale but determined. "They don't get to erase her," she said. The next day, we drove out to the house together. I could feel her tension as we walked up the driveway. It was strange, seeing someone else in her grandmother's home, touching the walls where Nicole once played. Cooking in the kitchen she had memorized, she moved slowly, making sure to photograph every corner and carefully pack anything that felt irreplaceable. The tin of recipes, Martha's old tea set, a few framed family photos. When we were done, she paused on the porch swing, her hand brushing the peeling paint. "I thought I'd feel empty," she said softly, "but it just makes me grateful. Grateful I had her. And I had this place for so long." We left the house behind for good that day. I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders, even though she was sad. It wasn't about the walls or the floors anymore. It was about preserving what mattered. Back at home, Nicole set up a small shelf just for Martha's things. She made a ritual of pulling out a recipe each week and cooking it. Last night, she made blueberry pie, the one Martha taught her to make when she was 8. And as she stirred the filling, she said, "This is home. This is what matters. Not the house, not the walls, us." I realized then how strong she was. How she could take a heartbreak like this and turn it into something tangible, something we could build on. She wasn't letting the house define her or her memories. She was carrying them forward, in our lives, in our kitchen, in the smell of baked pie and the laughter we shared while she stirred. Sometimes, at night, I catch her staring at the photos she brought back, almost talking to her grandmother, and I don't interrupt. She smiles faintly and then turns back to me. I know she's healing, and I'm learning to hold on to her hand through it. It's not perfect some days. She still talks about how unfair it all was. She still wishes the family had respected her. But more often now she talks about the future, about the kids we might have, about the home we'll build together, about filling our own space with love and memories. The house is gone, but the home, our home, is something we're creating every day. And for the first time since Martha passed, I see Nicole truly happy again. Not just surviving her grief, not just holding on to memories, but living fully in the present while honoring the past. And honestly, that feels like winning. It's been about 8 months since the house was sold, and a lot has changed, inside Nicole and me, and in the way we handle family. After the ordeal with the new owners, Nicole decided it was time to confront her family. She sent a carefully worded email to Linda, Chris, and Megan. She didn't rage or threaten. She laid out her feelings calmly, but firmly, how the house wasn't just property, how their decision to sell behind her back had hurt her, and how she hoped that in the future, family decisions would be made with respect, not convenience. To her surprise, Linda responded first, not defensively, not dismissively. She apologized. She admitted she had acted selfishly and hadn't realized how much the house meant to Nicole. Chris and Megan followed with similar notes, though Chris's felt more obligatory than heartfelt. Nicole didn't respond further. She didn't need to. She said the acknowledgement was enough. The real turning point came one Sunday afternoon when we were sitting on our own porch, the one we'd been fixing up since we bought the place. Nicole brought out Martha's old recipe box, carefully cleaned and polished. She opened it and handed me a card, the blueberry pie recipe. "I want to make a new tradition," she said. "Something for us, for our future, not the past, not the house, just us." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of tension lift. She had found a way to take what she loved, the memories, the lessons, the love her grandmother had given her, and create something entirely new. A few weeks later, we hosted our first family day at our new home. We invited close friends and a few relatives. Nicole cooked Martha's recipes, setting up a small corner dedicated to her grandmother. She told stories about the house, about the summers she spent picking blueberries, about Martha's laughter echoing through the hallways. Nobody mentioned the sale. It didn't matter. The day was about connection, laughter, and carrying the love forward. And then something unexpected happened. Diane, the woman who bought the old house, reached out. She had seen Nicole's photos online, of the recipes, the pie, the small shrine of memories. She wrote a note saying she understood the emotional significance of the place, and that she and Frank would take care of it. Honoring its history, Nicole read it aloud to me, and I saw her eyes well up, not with anger this time, but with relief. We laughed and cried that night. Making blueberry pie for anyone who would eat it, Nicole said, "I feel like I've finally laid it to rest. Not the memories, but the anger. I can finally breathe." It wasn't easy. Losing the house, feeling betrayed by family, it left scars, but it also taught us resilience. It taught Nicole to speak her truth, and it taught me how to support her without trying to fix everything. Most importantly, it taught us that home isn't a place. It's the people, the love, the shared experiences, and the care we put into carrying memory forward. Tonight, as I write this, Nicole is in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing dinner. Martha's recipes are on the counter, the smell of baked pie lingering in the air. The old house is gone, but the heart of it lives here, in our home, in us, in the life we're building together. And for the first time in months, I feel at peace. We survived betrayal, loss, and grief. We turned it into memory, love, and hope. And somehow, that feels even better than ownership. Stories number 11. My house suddenly became a second home for my son's friend. I never imagined I'd be housing a 17-year-old boy who wasn't mine. But life has a way of catching you off guard. I'm a 45-year-old mom of two. My son, Evan, who's 17, and my daughter Lily, who's 13. My husband Matt and I live in a pretty normal suburban neighborhood in Oregon. You know the kind. Quiet streets, neighbors who wave but don't really talk. Lawns that are all in silent competition. Evan's been best friends with Dylan since middle school. They met through baseball and have been practically inseparable ever since. Dylan's been over to our house 1,000 times. Movie nights, late-night Xbox marathons, sleepovers that lasted until breakfast. He's always been polite, a little shy but kind, and the kind of kid who says thank you every time you hand him a soda. But about 4 months ago, something started to feel off. Dylan started hanging around more, but not in the same way. Before, he'd come over laughing, tossing his backpack by the door. Lately, he'd show up quieter, more withdrawn, staying until the last possible minute before heading home. One night, it was raining hard, one of those Oregon downpours that soaks you just running to the car. It was close to 10:30 p.m., and Dylan was still on our couch, flipping through his phone. I asked if his parents knew he was still here, and he gave this weird shrug. Evan chimed in. "He's fine, Mom. His parents know." Something about the way he said it made me suspicious, but I let it go. At around 11:15, I told Dylan he really needed to head home. He looked out the window, hesitated, and said, "Do you mind if I just wait a bit? My dad's probably asleep anyway." That didn't sit right with me. Eventually, Matt offered to drive him. Dylan panicked, like actually panicked, and said, "No, please don't. It's okay, I'll walk." We insisted, but he bolted out the door before we could stop him. I remember standing there with Matt, watching this poor kid disappear into the rain, and my stomach just twisted. The next day, I told Evan to be honest with me. He got defensive at first, but when I pushed, he finally cracked. Apparently, Dylan's home life was a mess. His mom, Jenna, had been struggling with addiction for a few years, and his dad, Rick, was one of those guys who thought tough love meant yelling and slamming doors. Dylan said he'd been couch hopping between friends' houses for weeks. I called the school counselor the next morning to check if they knew what was going on, and she said Dylan had been flagged by teachers for housing instability. She also said they were trying to contact his dad, but he was uncooperative. That night I asked Dylan to come over for dinner. He looked hesitant but agreed, over spaghetti and garlic bread. I gently brought it up. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, and said, "I'm fine." "Really?" I looked him in the eye and said, "You're not fine, sweetheart. You don't have to lie here." He broke down crying at our table. It was awful, seeing a 17-year-old try to hold himself together like a grown man, shoulders shaking, hands covering his face. That night, I told him he could stay with us as long as he needed. The next day I tried calling his dad. Rick didn't answer, so I left a voicemail explaining the situation and asking him to call me back. He didn't. I texted him too. Nothing 2 days later. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Rick. His voice was gravelly, slurred, and he said, "You don't need to worry about my kid. He's just being dramatic. I'll handle it." I told him that his son was welcome here, that we had a spare room, that I wasn't trying to replace him. Just make sure Dylan was safe. Rick hung up on me, so I called the school counselor again, and she suggested I file for temporary guardianship if Dylan was going to stay long-term. She also said she'd document everything in case child services needed to step in. Matt and I talked for hours that night. We both knew what it meant to take on a teenager who wasn't ours. The emotional load, the legal mess, the risk of pissing off a volatile parent. But looking at Dylan, curled up on the couch in one of Evan's hoodies, it didn't even feel like a decision. We couldn't just throw him back to that. The first few weeks were an adjustment. He was polite to a fault, always asking before eating, thanking me for laundry, apologizing if he was in the way. He didn't know how to just be part of a family. One night, I overheard him and Evan talking in the kitchen. Evan said something like, "Dude, you don't have to say thanks every time Mom makes dinner." And Dylan replied, "I know, it's just not really something I'm used to." That broke me. Slowly he started opening up. He'd joke with Lily, help me carry groceries, even started making breakfast for everyone on Saturdays. Matt took him to baseball practice and bought him cleats when his old ones fell apart. Then, one Saturday morning, I got a knock on the door. It was Rick. He looked rough, sunken eyes reeking of beer, and that angry red flush of a man who'd been stewing too long. He didn't even say hello, just barked, "Where's my kid?" Dylan froze when he saw him. You could see the fear all over his face. Rick started yelling about how I was kidnapping his son, turning him against his family, meddling in things that weren't my business. Matt stepped between them, calm but firm, and told him to leave before we called the police. Rick shouted a few more choice words and stormed off. Dylan was shaking. I'd never seen a kid look so small. After that, we filed the paperwork for temporary guardianship with help from the counselor. It took a few weeks, but the court approved it. Dylan's mom never contested. She was apparently in rehab by then. And Rick didn't bother showing up. Now it's been 5 months, Dylan's grades are up. He made varsity baseball. He laughs more, sleeps through the night, and the other day, he called me Mom by accident. He went beet red afterward, stammering an apology. But I just smiled and said, "You don't have to be sorry for that. Matt and I know we can't fix everything for him. We're not his biological parents, and one day he'll have to navigate that on his own. But in this house he's safe, he's wanted, and that's enough." The hardest part has been realizing how easily kids like him fall through the cracks. How many Dylans are out there, doing everything they can to stay invisible because asking for help feels dangerous. Every time I see him laughing with Evan and Lily, I feel this weird mix of gratitude and sadness. Grateful that he found his way to us. Sad that he ever had to. If you'd told me a year ago I'd have a second teenager under my roof, I would have laughed. But now, I can't imagine the house without him. And the truth is, I think he's teaching us as much as we're giving him: patience, compassion, the power of showing up for someone when no one else will. Sometimes at dinner, when all 3 kids are joking around and arguing over the last roll, I catch myself smiling and thinking, this is what family really looks like? Not perfect, not planned, but real. And if I could go back to that rainy night when he stood in my doorway, shivering and scared, I'd still say the same thing. You can stay here as long as you need. Update, 6 months later. Hey Reddit. I didn't expect so many people to care about our little family story. But since a few people have messaged asking how things are going with Dylan, I figured I'd give an update. A lot has happened since I first wrote that post. and it feels almost surreal looking back on how chaotic everything used to be. The short version, things are better, not perfect, but better. When we first got temporary guardianship, it felt like we were holding our breath. Every knock on the door made me jump, half expecting Rick to show up again, or someone from social services to tell us there'd been a change. But that never happened. In fact, the school counselor, Ms. Daniels, checked in with us regularly and said Dylan was thriving academically and socially. Those words honestly made me tear up. We also got a call from Dylan's mom, Jenna, about 2 months ago. She's in rehab in Washington State and seems to be taking her recovery seriously. The call was awkward at first. She apologized to me over and over, and I didn't know what to say. Dylan didn't want to talk to her at the time, but he did listen quietly on speaker. She told him she's proud of him, and that she's working on getting healthy, for real this time. Afterward, Dylan just sat there for a while, staring at his hands, and then whispered, "I want to believe her." We told him he doesn't have to decide anything right now, that he can take it at his own pace. I could tell he was torn. Part of him wants that relationship, but part of him doesn't trust it yet. As for Rick, we haven't heard from him directly since that confrontation. But we did receive a call from a social worker saying he was aware of the current custody arrangement, and not pursuing any changes. I guess he decided to let it go. Or maybe he's just too wrapped up in his own world to care. Either way, we've been left alone, and that's been a huge relief. Emotionally, Dylan's come a long way. He's not that nervous, polite to a fault kid anymore. He laughs more. He teases Evan about his terrible haircut. He and Lily have their sibling spats over the remote like any other kids. He's comfortable enough now to raid the fridge without asking first, which, weirdly enough, was one of the biggest milestones for me. It means he feels at home. The other night, I overheard him telling Evan, "It's nice to actually want to come home." I don't think he knew I was in the hallway when he said it. I had to bite back tears. School's been good for him too. He's been working part-time at a local sporting goods store, saving up for his own car. He got invited to prom, which, by the way, turned into a whole thing because he didn't know how to tie a tie, and Matt had to teach him. Watching them stand in the mirror together, fumbling with that knot, felt like something straight out of a coming-of-age movie. There have been hard days too, nights where he wakes up from nightmares, or days when something small, a certain smell, a TV show, a passing comment, triggers him. Once, after a heated phone call with Jenna, he disappeared for a few hours. I was terrified. When he came back, he just said he needed to get some air. We talked that night, and he told me, "It's hard not to feel like everything could disappear again." That broke my heart. I hugged him and told him it wouldn't, not if I could help it. Matt's been incredible through all of this. He's patient in ways I didn't even realize he could be. He's teaching Dylan how to drive, which has turned into their thing. They go out every weekend, and apparently, Dylan's favorite route is this winding road by the lake. He says it's where he can breathe. We've started family therapy, too, all 5 of us. At first, Dylan was skeptical, but now he actually looks forward to it. Our therapist said something during one session that really stuck with me. You can't erase a child's past, but you can give them new memories strong enough to carry forward. That's what we're trying to do. A few weeks ago, Dylan got his first college acceptance letter to Oregon State. He wants to major in sports management. When the envelope came, he didn't open it right away. He just stared at it saying, "I don't want to be disappointed." When he finally did and saw the word "congratulations," he actually cried. Evan filmed it, because brothers are annoying like that. And I've probably watched that video 10 times. He said, "I never thought college was even an option." We've talked about him staying here until he's ready to live on his own. I told him he'll always have a place here. Whether that's a few months or forever, he smiled and said, "I guess you're stuck with me, huh?" And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Sometimes I still think about how it all started. That rainy night when he didn't want to go home. How something so small, a single decision to open our door, changed everything. I didn't know we'd end up here, navigating court papers, therapy sessions, and teenage heartbreak, but I'm so glad we did. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes it's the one you build. Quietly, one dinner, one laugh, one late-night talk at a time, and maybe that's the real miracle in all of this. That a scared, soaked teenager knocking on my door turned into my son in every way that matters. Final update, 2 years later, I wasn't planning to post again. But every now and then someone messages asking what happened to Dylan, and honestly, I think I just needed to sit down and write this for myself too. The last 2 years have been a blur in the best possible way, and the house feels so full now. Full of noise, love, and that kind of quiet comfort you only get when everyone finally feels safe. So, the big news first. Dylan just finished his freshman year of college. He ended up choosing Oregon State after all, majoring in sports management like he always talked about. When he got the dorm assignment, he actually called me in a panic because he didn't know how to do laundry. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. This kid who'd been through more by 16 than most adults have by 30 was suddenly terrified of a washing machine. We drove him up together. Me, Matt, Lily, and Evan. And I swear it felt like dropping off our firstborn all over again. He hugged each of us, even Evan, who pretended to gag but was secretly teary-eyed. And when it was my turn, he whispered, "You changed my whole life." I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "You did that yourself." That drive home was quiet. Matt and I held hands most of the way, both of us pretending not to notice the lump in our throats. Since then, Dylan's been thriving. He calls every Sunday, sometimes more. He joined an intramural baseball team, got a part-time job at a local gym, and this one made me melt. He started volunteering with a youth mentoring program. He said, "I just want to be the kind of adult I needed when I was 13. His relationship with his biological mom, Jenna, is complicated, but better. They talk occasionally. She's still in recovery, living in Washington. Working part-time at a diner, she sent him a birthday card this year with a note that said, "I'm proud of the man you're becoming. I'm sorry I couldn't be there for the boy you were." Dylan showed it to me and said, "I think I'm ready to forgive her." And he meant it. You could tell by his voice, soft, steady, calm. He still comes home for holidays and long weekends. The first Thanksgiving he came back from college, he walked through the door with this huge grin, kissed Lily on the top of her head and said, "You grew." Then he turned to Evan and said, "You still can't beat me at Mario Kart." Within 10 minutes, the two of them were shouting and laughing like no time had passed. It's funny. People always talk about how kids grow up, but they never really tell you how families grow. Too, when Dylan first came into our lives, I used to worry constantly about doing the right thing, saying the right words, not overstepping. Now it's just natural. He's ours, not legally, not by blood, but in every way that counts. Last Christmas, he surprised us with a framed photo of the 5 of us at his high school graduation. At the bottom, he'd written in small, messy handwriting, "Thank you for giving me a home." I cried so hard Matt had to finish opening gifts without me. As for life here, it's quieter now that he's away at school, but it's a good kind of quiet. Evan just started high school, Lily's obsessed with soccer, and I'm still working at the local clinic. Matt's been talking about getting a camper so we can drive up to Oregon on long weekends. If he won't come home, he said, we'll just bring home to him. Sometimes, when I'm cleaning the kitchen late at night or folding laundry, I still think about that first night. The knock on the door, the rain, the scared kid standing there asking if he could just stay the night. I think about how easily it could have gone another way. If I'd said no, or if he'd been too afraid to ask, and every single time, I'm grateful. Grateful that he found us. Grateful that we found him. Grateful that something as simple as compassion turned into something as beautiful and permanent as family. Last week he texted me out of the blue, "Hey, can you send me that lasagna recipe you used to make? My roommate wants to try it." And for some reason that message hit me harder than all the big milestones. Because that's what love looks like, right? The little things that keep you connected. Lasagna recipes, Sunday phone calls, dumb memes, that's family. If I've learned anything from this whole journey, it's that sometimes life gives you a choice to step into someone's story. And if you do, you might just find your own story getting rewritten. 2, Dylan's doing great, we're doing great, and for the first time in a long time, everything feels exactly the way it's supposed to. Stories number 12, I babysat for $500 cash. I'll never do it again. When I first saw the post in the local mom's Facebook group, I thought it was too good to be true. Need an emergency babysitter for the weekend? 2 kids, 7 and 4. Easygoing $500 cash for both nights. I stared at that post for a solid 5 minutes before I convinced myself it wasn't a scam. I was 22, a broke college student living off instant ramen and gas station coffee. $500 for a weekend? That was rent money. I figured it would be one of those rich suburban families who wanted someone to watch their kids while they attended some fancy gala. Easy money. The mom's name was Rachel. She messaged me back within minutes after I commented. We chatted a bit. She said she checked my profile and that I seemed responsible and sweet. Then she gave me her address. It was about 20 minutes out of town, in one of those newer neighborhoods where every house looks like it came straight from a Pinterest board. When I pulled up that Friday night, I saw a shiny white SUV in the driveway, and a big house with those string lights hanging on the porch. Everything looked perfect. Rachel answered the door wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her husband, Evan, was behind her, putting on a blazer. They looked like they were headed to a photo shoot instead of a charity dinner. "Thanks again for doing this last minute," Rachel said. She smiled, but she looked tense, not rush tense, nervous tense. "No problem," I said. "You mentioned 2 kids?" "Yeah, Claire's 7 and Mason's 4. They're good kids, just a little energetic. There's food in the fridge, Wi-Fi passwords on the counter, and you can sleep in the guest room if you want. We'll be back late Sunday morning." Evan came over and handed me an envelope. I peeked inside. 5 crisp $100 bills. "We pay up front," he said. "Makes things easier," I was shocked. "Wow, thanks. I appreciate that." They gave me a few last-minute instructions. Bedtimes, snacks, no soda after 7. And then they were gone. I watched their SUV roll down the street and felt this rush of relief. 2 nights, $500 and Netflix? Easiest gig ever, at least that's what I thought. The first couple of hours were fine. Claire was quiet, glued to her tablet, and Mason was obsessed with showing me his dinosaur toys. I made them mac and cheese, we watched the Lego movie, and I put them to bed around 9. It was around 10:30 when things started getting weird. I was lying on the couch scrolling TikTok when I heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. Slow, heavy steps pacing back and forth. My first thought was that one of the kids had gotten up, maybe to use the bathroom, but when I went to check, both of them were sound asleep. I told myself the house was just settling. Big houses creak, right? I went back downstairs, turned off the TV, and started getting ready for bed in the guest room. Then around midnight, I heard it again. This time, it sounded like someone walking down the hallway outside my room. I froze. The floorboards creaked closer and closer, until the sound stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock. Nothing. After about 30 seconds, I slowly opened the door. The hallway was empty. The air felt heavy, like when you walk into a room after someone's been arguing. I checked the kids again, still sleeping. I went back to bed, pulled the covers up, and told myself I was imagining things. I finally drifted off sometime around 2 a.m. At 3:17, I woke up to whispering. It was faint at first, like 2 people talking in another room. I sat up, trying to place it, and realized it was coming from the baby monitor on the nightstand. The monitor wasn't supposed to be on. I hadn't touched it since Rachel left. I leaned closer. The static crackled. And then I heard Mason's voice say, "She's not Mommy." I froze. Then a woman's voice, soft and low, whispered back, "I know. I nearly threw that monitor across the room." I ran straight upstairs, heart pounding so hard I could barely think. When I burst into Mason's room, both kids were asleep. The monitor camera was pointed at his bed. Red light blinking like normal. I unplugged it. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, the kids acted completely normal. I made pancakes, we played outside, and nothing weird happened the rest of the day. I almost convinced myself I'd dreamt it. But then, Saturday night, around 9:45, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I checked the peephole, I saw a woman standing there in a raincoat. Even though it wasn't raining, she looked about 50, with gray hair pulled into a bun. I didn't open the door. "Can I help you?" I called through the wood. She smiled, a small, polite smile, and said, "Is Rachel home?" "She's out of town. I'm the babysitter." The woman's face dropped a little. "Oh," she said quietly. "You shouldn't be here." Before I could respond, she turned and walked down the driveway. No car, no umbrella, nothing, just disappeared into the dark. I locked every door and window in that house. I called Rachel, but she didn't pick up. I texted her twice. No answer. The rest of that night was a blur. The footsteps came back, heavier this time. I swear I heard someone breathing outside the guest room door. Around 2 a.m., the door handle started to rattle. I jumped up and yelled, "Who's there?" And everything went silent. I didn't sleep. When Rachel and Evan came home the next morning, I was sitting on the couch with all the lights on and both kids watching cartoons. Rachel looked at me like she already knew. "You heard it, didn't you?" she said quietly. I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "The noises, The voices. You're not the first sitter who's said something. Evan shot her a sharp look, but she just sighed. This house. It was my grandmother's. She passed away here last year. Mason used to talk to her all the time before she died. Sometimes he still does. I just stood there, clutching my bag. I think I should go, Rachel nodded. I understand. Thank you for watching them. I left without looking back. A week later, she Venmo'd me another $100 for the trouble. I never replied. That night, I deleted the Facebook Moms group and blocked Rachel's number. I still think about Mason saying, "She's not mommy." Sometimes I wonder if that old woman at the door was who he thought he was talking to. It's been a few weeks since that weekend, and honestly, I still haven't completely processed everything that happened. I keep replaying moments over and over in my head, Mason whispering into the baby monitor, the footsteps in the hallway, and that woman showing up at the door. Every time I think I've moved on, I remember a detail and my stomach drops all over again. After I left the house, I didn't have any immediate babysitting jobs lined up, and part of me was relieved. I spent that weekend at home catching up on sleep, talking to my roommate Tina about it. I didn't want to tell anyone else, not even my family, because I figured they'd either think I was exaggerating or worse, call me crazy. Tina's reaction surprised me. She immediately said, "Nope, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole." That made me feel a little better. Like maybe I wasn't imagining things. I kept thinking about Rachel and Evan. I know she meant well, and I don't think she was trying to scare me, but it was clear that she wasn't going to explain everything either. She acted like all of it was normal. That made me uncomfortable. How do you babysit for someone when the house itself feels alive in ways you can't explain? I kept the camera lens I had saved for during that weekend, and ironically, I spent a lot of time photographing empty spaces. Hallways, rooms, corners of the city. Anything that felt quiet and still. I guess it was my way of trying to process the weirdness, but sometimes, when I edit the pictures at night, I swear I catch shadows that weren't there before. After that weekend, I got another babysitting request from a different family. It was a smaller job. 1 kid, 2 hours on a weekday. I almost said yes for the money, but something in me stopped. I realized that weekend wasn't just about the cash. It was about my comfort and mental health. That experience had pushed me to value my safety more than any amount of money. A couple of nights ago, I was walking home from a friend's house and remembered that old house. The memory made my hands sweat. I remembered Mason's whisper, "She's not mommy," and I remembered the way the woman at the door didn't speak to me directly. Just made me feel watched. I don't know if I'll ever forget that feeling. I've thought about calling Rachel to get closure, to understand what really happened. But I keep imagining the conversation turning into her defending the house, or Evan chiming in, and I just don't have the energy for it, so I haven't. I still tell myself I'll babysit again someday. But I know it won't be any family that's weirdly secretive or has a history they're not telling me about. I need something normal. Something safe. That weekend taught me that cash isn't worth my peace of mind. No amount of money could make it worth the fear, the sleepless nights, or the way my heart raced whenever I heard a floorboard creak. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if the woman at the door had come back later, or if Mason had gotten up in the middle of the night. I try to push those thoughts aside, but they creep in sometimes, and my chest tightens just thinking about it. Honestly, the only way I've coped is by keeping busy. I've been diving into photography, editing, posting on social media, and even working a few odd jobs that don't involve anyone else's children. It's not glamorous, and it's not a huge income, but it's peace of mind. I've realized that weekend changed me. I can't be that naive babysitter who thinks $500 solves everything. I can't ignore my instincts, and I know now that my comfort and safety are worth more than any amount of money. Sometimes I lie awake and hear imaginary floorboards creaking. My roommate jokes about it, and I laugh, but part of me will always remember that house. That weekend, it's burned into my memory, and I've decided, definitively, that I will never babysit there again, not for $500, not for $1,000, not for anything. It's been nearly a year since that weekend, and I think I've finally managed to make some sense of it, though the memories still creep up on me sometimes. I haven't babysat for anyone new since then. Not because I don't want to, but because I realized something important. I can't put myself in situations where my safety or peace of mind feels secondary to money. That $500 seemed like a dream at the time, but now it feels like a warning sign I ignored. After the weekend, I stayed in touch with Tina for support. We would talk about everything I experienced, dissecting each detail like I was in some detective story. She insisted I write everything down, which helped me keep the memory from turning into vague nightmares in my head. Reviewing it over and over made me understand just how intense it had been. The whispering, the footsteps, Mason's voice, the woman at the door. Every little thing added up. Rachel and Evan never reached out after that. I didn't either. I don't even know if they noticed I unplugged the monitor, or if they realized how terrified I had been. Honestly, I don't think I want to know. There's some comfort in letting it stay a closed chapter. I did start babysitting again, but for families I already knew and trusted. One family had a toddler I'd watched for months. Another had a pair of elementary school kids, and the parents were nearby during the evening. The contrast was stark. It reminded me that not all families are like Rachel and Evan's. Some are ordinary, funny, slightly chaotic, but safe. It helped me rebuild my confidence in my abilities as a babysitter, but I never let the pay blind me to my instincts again. The photography I'd leaned into during that time has become more than a hobby. It's my refuge. I spend hours at night editing photos, wandering the city streets, capturing things I didn't even notice before. I started a small side business, taking portraits and event shots, and people genuinely like my work. It's been grounding to have something I control completely. Unlike that weekend where I felt completely at the mercy of a house and its secrets, sometimes, when I'm editing, I still hear the faintest echoes in my head. The whisper from the baby monitor or the footsteps outside my guest room. But now, instead of panic, it reminds me of how far I've come. I survived it. I learned my boundaries. I learned to trust my instincts, and most importantly, I learned that no amount of cash is worth feeling unsafe or fearful. I think the scariest part of that weekend wasn't the money, the house, or even the unexplained visitor. It was realizing that I had almost ignored every warning sign because I wanted to believe in easy money. I've learned now that my peace of mind isn't negotiable, and that lesson is carried over into every other part of my life. I'll never forget that weekend, and part of me doubts I'll ever stop replaying it. But I also know that it changed me in ways that have made me stronger and more aware. I'm more careful, more assertive, and more willing to walk away from situations that feel wrong, no matter how tempting they are. If I could give my past self one piece of advice, it would be this. $500 is nothing compared to the value of your safety. Your sanity and your intuition, trust them. I've learned that the hard way, and I'll never make that mistake again.